Hey, think of the positives, Browns fans. You still have a better edge rusher than TJ Watt. Man, I can't believe it. Just in the nick of time, as I'm preparing to reveal the Browns as the number 29 team in this series in my preseason power rankings, they decide it's time to move on to trade Myles Garrett. And selfishly, I'm happy because I got to make the adjustments, and now we'll have this whole episode to reassess the Browns post-Myles Garrett trade. But yes, unfortunately, it does screw up the rankings from our first 3 episodes. Not the end of the world, but the Browns do slide down a couple of spots. Deja vu, if you will, as today is the reveal of the number 31 team in my preseason power rankings with a deep dive not into the Arizona Cardinals, but the Cleveland Browns. Myles Garrett out, but we still have a lot of fun stuff to talk about here today. And we have a wonderful guest interview with Cory Kinnan of the Daft of Draft podcast. Had a lot of fun breaking things down with Cory. So you're not going to want to miss that as well. As we begin here, if you could do me a huge little favor, please take just a second to hit that like button down below. It's a free and easy thing that really does support this series and my channel. And of course, make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss any of these deep dives leading up to the number 1 team in my power rankings throughout the course of this summer. So without further ado, let's begin. As we do in this series, we go through every aspect of the team, through all of the position groups, and start with the coaching staff and ask the big question as we take a look at their offseason changes. Did they get better, worse, or stay the same? And we'll begin there with the coaching staff, where the Browns are making significant changes. They do part ways, say goodbye to Kevin Stefanski, who, from Browns standards, had a good run in Cleveland. I think things had kind of ran their course, and I've always kind of felt a little bit on an island saying that, look, Stefanski is a perfectly fine coach, but is he a good enough coach to really stand on the resume of 2 Coach of the Year awards? That felt like it was doing a lot of heavy lifting with the job he was actually doing in Cleveland. So it is a loss. You know, I like Kevin Stefanski. I'm pulling for him in Atlanta, and we'll get to the Falcons deep dive and what I think of the hire for them. But I understand moving on from Stefanski. Really the biggest loss, and part of the reason I think that second Coach of the Year especially is a little bit, overrated, is that Kevin Stefanski won Coach of the Year in 2022, I think it was, because of Jim Schwartz and what he did with that defense. And this has been one of the hardest defenses to face year in, year out. Of course, Myles Garrett, having been here, has been a big part of that as well. But Jim Schwartz is a phenomenal defensive coach. And after the Browns choose to not choose him as the head coach, he says, he pulls an Eric Cartman and says,
"Screw you guys, I'm going home."
Literally home to his family, where he's going to be watching the NFL from his couch this year, presumably. But that is a significant loss, not be able to retain him. And then Tommy Rees, the offensive coordinator, does follow Kevin Stefanski down to Atlanta. Bubba Ventrone no longer here. So a full departure with the figureheads of this coaching staff. And then insert Todd Monken, a very nice hire coming over from Baltimore, a familiar opponent there, having spent his last, 3 seasons in Baltimore. And then they also hired Travis Switzer from Baltimore to be the offensive coordinator de jour there. Todd Monken is an offensive coach. He'll be in charge of the offense at large. And then Mike Rutenberg comes up from Atlanta. Ironically, he is their choice for defensive coordinator. And then Brian Storer, the special teams coach, being hired here. So as far as did they get better, did they get worse, I'm going to take the coward's way out and say it is simply to be determined. I think there is upside for Todd Monken to actually be an upgrade to Kevin Stefanski, his first go at being a head coach here in the NFL. I would say decent-sized shoes to fill. Replacing Kevin Stefanski, though not impossible, shoes to fill. And really the loss of Jim Schwartz has to be factored in there, and why I can't just say certainly upgraded as well, because you got to factor in the coaching they're going to get on the defensive side of things as well with this big question. So again, to be determined if they upgraded their coaching staff. But let's dive deeper into this coaching staff and discuss where I have this staff ranked as they stack up against the rest of the league, and more importantly, how this team is going to look schematically speaking on both sides of the ball. And after a couple years at this point of throwing Todd Monken's name out there as a head coach candidate, the Browns choose him and keep the 60-year-old Todd Monken in the division here as he comes over from the Baltimore Ravens after a really good 3-year tenure with the Ravens. Really did a good job doing what we had all wanted to see with Lamar Jackson, kind of evolving from the Greg Roman offense, which was very, just to simplify it, the term, like gimmicky, like limiting how much of a drop back passing game they had really allowed Lamar to run. They hired Todd Monken with years and years of coaching and different systems at the college level in Tampa as an offensive coordinator, just a large breadth of experience and adaptability, and with the ability to bring more pro-style concepts to the table. They hired him with that vision in mind and absolutely succeeded. I mean, they never reached the ultimate goal, and Lamar had some injuries last year, but they re-unlocked, I think they would just call that reopened, Lamar as an MVP candidate type of QB, and Todd Monken deserves a ton of credit for that, right? So I think it is well-deserved at this point, even though he is 60 years old. I think it's well-deserved for him to get this opportunity as a head coach, and he's a very qualified hire for the Cleveland Browns, a team that was certainly in a bit of a weird spot, right? Not to spoil the quarterback conversation, but you have a abysmal quarterback room that gets a lot of headlines because of the two guys that are in the room. You have Myles Garrett every offseason at this point, kind of unhappy, and eventually we came to the point here where we realized they are going to trade him away. This team has not done a lot of winning. You have a placeholder defensive coach in Jim Schwartz that may or may not want the job, and it was a rocky opening. And to get a qualified candidate like Todd Monken is a win for the Browns. And I am hoping that he can be the guy that kind of drags the Browns through this last year or so of this transition period in their organization after they obviously thought like Deshaun Watson was going to be the final missing piece on a championship caliber team, and it could not have gone in a more opposite direction. It's been a multiple year process to get their way through that, and a couple of great drafts the last couple of years. Now a really good head coach hire. I don't look at this as like a David Culley placeholder hire of an older coach that's like waited for his turn. Like, I do believe Todd Monken can be that guy and have an extended tenure here and hopefully get the Browns to where they need to go. Now, he himself has a lot to prove, even as an older coach. I have him as the head coach ranked 25th among NFL head coaches, which as a starting point for a rookie head coach, that's still respectable. Like, again, I like the hire, but he's got a lot of room to climb there. And then he definitely has a lot of work to do with what I do for this series, the overall coach and culture ranking, which of course is going to factor in who the head coach is, but it's putting so much more into that. It's, culture. Do you have a winning locker room? Some of this is ownership meddling. Does the team get in their own way at times? To say the Cleveland Browns have earned the benefit of the doubt, well, let's just say that's not a term that we throw around quite often with the Cleveland Browns. And this overall coach and culture ranking that I give these teams is effectively my benefit of the doubt slider that plays into how I calculate a lot of these rankings and stuff. And the Browns are tied for dead last with an F ranking there, 31st to 32nd. And Todd Monken's going to have his hands full establishing a winning culture and turning that side of things around here in Cleveland. Now, as far as schematically speaking, there's, I would say Todd Monken is the range of what he can run or could run in Cleveland is so wide, so vast that it's impossible for us to sit here and predict exactly what type of offense they're going to run. Obviously, with Lamar Jackson, he was able to go in and kind of build a new offense that still implemented a lot of the QB run, heavy personnel, play action stuff that Lamar thrives in, but also evolving the drop back passing game. I think one of the biggest selling points on Todd Monken is the combination of experience, versatility as a play caller, and communication skills. It's been really fun to see him come in with a big smile and a lot of personality. Those three things will come into play here in Cleveland. And instead of looking at this like, trying to predict what sort of offense is this going to be, I would just say it could be anything, but I think Todd Monken is the guy to really look at this young team, especially a young offensive roster, and identify what guys are good at an early level, lean into those strengths, and then continuously develop around those strengths, identify new strengths with these guys as they get better, and continuing to cater to those skill sets within their scheme and evolving his offense throughout his tenure here. And I think Todd Monken has proved that he's going to be capable of that. So that's about as good of a thing as you can say about a designer of an offense or a defense, is diversity and catering to his players' strengths and weaknesses. And I think that is more important to focus on Todd Monken's ability to do that than to come in and say, well, yeah, this is what he ran in Baltimore. I don't think it's going to look very similar here. They don't have Lamar Jackson, right? Like, they don't have Derrick Henry. It's just different. And Todd Monken knows that. So I'm excited to see what this offense looks like schematically. And then one more ranking there, Todd Monken related, is the offensive coach rankings. And the Browns are fairly respectable there as, again, a starting point with Todd Monken coming in with room still to improve, but right around middle of the pack there in a league that has a lot of good play callers. But B- grades across the board for both pass game and run game coaching, where they rank 16th to 23rd for pass game coaching and 14th to 23rd for run game coaching. And then you do also have Travis Switzer here as the offensive coordinator by name. We'll see in time how much Monken wants to pass on to him, whether it's play calling or input on the playbook and all that stuff. And if we learn more about Switzer in time, he's not someone I'm particularly familiar with. He's been kind of buried in the Baltimore offensive coaching infrastructure for almost a decade. He was under Marty Morningwig originally, starting in 2017, Greg Roman after that, and then Monken. The last 3 years, clearly Monken has enjoyed working with him as he made him his left-hand man. So just a name we'll have to continue to follow. But ultimately, this offense and its scheming and coaching is going to fall on Monken. And then you look at the defensive side of the ball, as they were unable to retain Jim Schwartz, and they go and hire Mike Rutenberg, ironically last coached in Atlanta, where the Browns' previous seemingly entire coaching staff is headed. So Rutenberg comes up, and this is going to be a first kind of look at him. He's been around. He's been deep in the weeds of the Gus Bradley, Robert Saleh, coaching tree, really, stemming from the original Seattle 3 scheme that has certainly evolved over the years to more of a split safety, quarters-focused coverage system on the back end. But Rutenberg actually started in Jacksonville under Gus Bradley, and Todd Wash followed after that, is also a part of that coaching staff. And then he joins up with Robert Saleh in San Francisco and then follows him to the Jets. And then he follows Jeff Ulbrich down from the Jets down to Atlanta. And Jeff Ulbrich initially stemmed more from the Dan Quinn portion of the Seattle 3 coaching tree, but obviously bridging back with Robert Saleh with the Jets, kind of a cousin marries a cousin scenario if you're looking at that as a coaching family tree. But Mike Rutenberg has been in all of it, right? And presumably will bring those philosophies up here to Cleveland. And what's fascinating there, as you really get into it from a schematic point of view, is there's a lot of similarities between kind of Robert Saleh's defense in San Francisco and what Cleveland has been running here under Jim Schwartz, especially when you look at the fronts and you really talk about primarily using those 4-2 style fronts and leaning heavily into twists and games and moving guys around up front, and oftentimes being fully comfortable having lighter, more athletic interior defensive tackles because they are slanting and causing chaos and using their athleticism more than traditional hold your ground, two-gapping style defense. Not that you'll never ask those guys to do it, but the scheme does a lot of heavy lifting in terms of penetrating, confusing run schemes, creating that feeling of running into a hurricane up front. There's a lot of similarities, and Mike Rutenberg is going to be very familiar with all of that. They most recently in Atlanta were more of a 3-4 style system. Rutenberg has done both. He's going to be able to look at this defense and decide, do we want to be a 3-4 scheme or a 4-3 scheme? In reality, as with most teams, these teams are just kind of running all of it in terms of base fronts. But yeah, do you have your edge rushers standing up? Do you have them putting your hands in the dirt? Ultimately, it's probably going to come down to what those guys are more comfortable with, which outside of Jared Verse, who just came from a 3-4 style system, these guys have been putting their hand in the dirt on the edge, so that's probably what we'll see. And it's not like Verse can't do that. But just I think, similar to what we said about with Todd Monken, I think Rutenberg, in that sense, in terms of what type of front are we going to run, he's going to be able to be adaptable. And as far as how they're getting after it up front, I think things are just going to be pretty rinse repeat. And very Jim Schwartzy. Now, what I'm interested to see is how do the coverage structures look here? Because while the Seattle 3 defense is the origin of this coaching tree, around 2018, really around the time where that Atlanta defense that was Dan Quinn and kind of the new face of the Seattle 3 defense at that point in time, that defense had been getting obliterated. Seattle fell off with the cover 3 stuff. That was around 2018. That was when we really saw this coaching tree evolve into the more modern approach of split safety, quarters-oriented coverages. And that is where Jim Schwartz would laugh. The Browns have been one of the most single-high-oriented defenses in the league. They ran the 31st cover 4 last year and 23rd in cover 6, even 15th in cover 2. So pretty damn low in terms of ending up in a 2-high structure. Yet they were number 1 in the league in cover 1 man, 36.3% of the time, another 29% of cover 3 on top of that. That's very different from the types of defenses Rutenberg has been running. You look at what they did in Atlanta last year, they were second in cover 4. The Jets, when Rutenberg was there with Saleh, were always in the top 10 for cover 4. They did also run cover 1 in Atlanta, though. They were 10th in cover 1. So that's probably going to be a big shift on the back end. I think we're going to see these corners, these safeties asked to do more pre-snap, two-shell stuff, that style of coverage, as opposed to the very aggressive mindset that they've had with Jim Schwartz, where you're going to get in your face. It's going to be a lot of single high, almost that like Detroit style. Oh man, now I'm thinking of Detroit style pizza. I guess I shouldn't record hungry, but the Detroit style defensive philosophy of a lot of press cover 1 type of stuff. It's been a lot of that here in Cleveland. And I think that's where you're going to see a big shift, most likely, unless Rutenberg just wants to do what Jim Schwartz did. But I would imagine, especially with Garrett leaving, they're going to do kind of an internal review of what they can do and what they want to do with this new coordinator coming in. So he's definitely qualified. Like, that's a lot of big names he's worked under there, most notably Robert Saleh. It's a proven system around the league, and definitely excited to see where this goes for him. I did put the up arrow on him, but he's very unproven coming in, organizing this defense for himself. So he's right there with some of these other defensive coordinators that we've had in these previous deep dives, where it's kind of a nice starting point, C+ grades, tied for the bottom for defensive coaching in a league where there's really not a defensive coach that I think is a bad defensive coach running a defense in the NFL today. It's more just some are better than others and some are more unproven. And obviously Mike Rutenberg is still unproven, but a very reasonable hire, and fun to kind of get into his background and what sort of differences we might see here. But there is your Cleveland Browns coaching staff. Now, before we go any further here, I want to thank the sponsor for today's deep dive, Prize Picks, America's #1 sports picks platform. If you're dialed into NBA playoffs, NHL playoffs, or maybe you're like me and you've really rediscovered your love for the game of baseball, well, Prize Picks lineups will keep you glued to your seat. You select your player stats, whether it's points, strikeouts, goals, you name it. String together your lineup, picking more or less on those stats, and you get your chance at massive payouts. Prize Picks even has team picks now where you can go ahead and pick the winner, the spread, the total on any major game, and that's available in most states, including California, Texas, and Florida. And another reason I'm excited to partner with Prize Picks is now you can follow along with my picks, whether it is those baseball lineups throughout the summer or, of course, getting into the stats and trying to pick winners during football season here on the channel. It's just at TFG_football, just like my Twitter handle. You can follow along with my picks on the social part of the Prize Picks app. So if you sign up today using code HMA, Prize Picks will also reward you with $50 in bonus lineups when you play your first $5 lineup there. Good luck, everybody. Please do play responsibly as well. And a big thanks to Prize Picks again for sponsoring today's deep dive. But let's go ahead and get into this Myles Garrett-less Browns roster. We are going to start, though, on the offensive side of the ball, taking a look at the quarterback room. And as we look at their offseason changes, they do have a couple of new pieces in this quarterback room. A familiar face, but a new piece compared to last year. Deshaun Watson makes his return to the practice field after suffering the Achilles injury last year and not playing. And they did draft Taylon Green in the 6th round, who is currently a quarterback. We'll talk about if I think that's his best long-term position here in just a second. So those are your additions. In terms of did they get better, worse, or stayed the same, I said slightly upgraded, I guess. I mean, it's hard to be worse, and those are two names added to the room. Let's just get into it. Right now, we actually don't know who's going to be starting for the Cleveland Browns, whether it is Deshaun Watson there or the all-discussed or Pro Bowler Shedeur Sanders, one of the most laughable Pro Bowl additions of all time, if not the most laughable. The Browns are in a bad spot, man. And honestly, while this could be a 40-minute conversation between these two quarterbacks, whether it's all of Deshaun Watson's horrible past and repeating things I've said on this channel about, how I'm not a Deshaun Watson fan and all of that and how bad he's played when he's coming to Cleveland and how big of a disaster this has been. We could spend 20 minutes there. We could spend 20 minutes talking about Shedeur and how he fell in the draft and how he's got this massive media spotlight despite being a completely uninteresting quarterback on the field. I'm going to choose to keep this a little bit shorter. I'll get into it. I'm not going to just cut everything out there, but man, I don't expect these guys to play well. I do have the Browns ranked as the worst quarterback room in the league. That shouldn't be controversial to say that. And I would be pretty surprised, number one, if both these guys just play through the year and play at a starting level and there's no reason to play one or the other. I think it's going to be a little bit of a quote-unquote hot hand, or one guy has the cold hand, so we're going to try the other guy out type of approach. We might even see some Dylan Gabriel, who we had to watch last year. But I would be very surprised if this team that has really positioned themselves to draft a quarterback next year by getting another first-round pick and making them a worse football team trading away Myles Garrett, I would be very surprised if we're not just trying to get through this year with the Browns and then get a quarterback in next year's draft class that is shaping up in a very positive light. So for that reason, I'm not going to spend a super long time here, but we'll get into it a little bit here. So, okay, Watson coming back from the Achilles. What we know is that when he was at his peak, pre-massage scandal, peak health, he was a all-pro level, amazing quarterback. The version of Deshaun Watson we've seen here is a sporadic quarterback that it is hard to watch this version of Deshaun Watson, even before the Achilles injury. It is really hard to watch him here in Cleveland after taking a full year off of football in Houston and question how much he cares about football, how much he's kept his body in shape. He looked slower. He looked worse at reading defenses. Not a whole lot of care for emotions and whether the team's winning or losing, just kind of going about his business, kind of even keel. It's just been awful, man. And ultimately, because of that, now paired with a physical Achilles injury, it's so hard to imagine that we're going to get anything remotely close to Houston Deshaun Watson. The dream, quote unquote, as a Browns fan is that he's matured. He's, at this point, sick of everybody like me talking crap about him, questioning his love of the game. He's at a point now where he's like, all right, this is actually my last year in Cleveland. Like, if I want to keep playing football, I have to show something this year. And then, maybe we can start to have a conversation of oh, wow, he's actually looks like he's developed a chemistry with his wide receivers. He looks like he knows the playbook. He knows where he's supposed to go with the ball. He's not just making reckless decisions out of nowhere. If those things start to come along, maybe we can get some diminished version of what he was in Houston, but without the athletic ability to move around, which again, he's let his body get out of shape and now has this Achilles injury. He hasn't looked fast. He hasn't looked elusive. At first, maybe he was breaking sacks pretty well. But once he gets rolling, it's man, Deshaun used to be so much more athletic than that. So he's really going to have to start winning with his mind much more often. And it's not like Deshaun's ever had this missile for an arm. He's had a pretty strong arm, but it's not like that's ever been his biggest selling point. It's going to have to be up here for him. Not betting on it though, right? He's coming in just himself as the lowest ranked starting quarterback in this series. And then you have Shedeur. Which the fact that Deshaun Watson right now, and we talk about this with Cory as well, by the way, there's plenty more to be discussed with these QBs in that interview towards the end. But look, the fact that so early in the process, there's a lot of fingers pointing at the fact that, Deshaun Watson just looks better than Shedeur. That ain't great, right? Shedeur did not play well when he stepped in. A lot of his production was on short passes where you had a lot of missed tackles or screen production. He had a couple big throws, maybe a couple small moments, but looked every bit like a backup quarterback. And it was in a really rough infrastructure, right? There's no denying the offensive line's been bad here. Jerry Jeudy was horrible last year. The playmakers have not been enough. There's still a path for Shedeur to be what his best case projection always was for me, which is a mid-range starter in the league. Someone that, I don't want to just completely dump on Shedeur. He is a thoughtful passer. I think the number one thing that stands out for me is and I always praised him for this coming out, is when he lets go of the ball, there does seem to be a mental kind of barrier or pass through, or I don't know how to describe it, but as he's releasing the ball, there's a part of him that's where is the most ideal placement for this ball? He accuracy wise, he might be a little bit more sporadic and the ball might not always go where he wants it to, but in terms of throwing with touch and placement and setting guys up for run after catch opportunities, he's a very thoughtful passer in that sense, and that can be a really good trait inside a healthy infrastructure. He can extend plays, but he's not a great athlete. He doesn't have a great arm to make really hard throws off platform. But we definitely saw a lot of mistakes, forcing the ball directly into the teeth of the defense, and just a young passer that in an unhealthy infrastructure as Cleveland was, it was always going to be really hard for him. So can he win this job? Yes. And that would be a good starting point. But he does have a long, long way to go based on what he was as a prospect, but also just from what we saw last year, before you're into a range of okay, this could be something like the early stages of Brock Purdy, or early stages of Kirk Cousins, where it's someone that you weren't counting on to be a franchise quarterback. He shows enough that you're kind of opening up the leash and giving him a bigger opportunity. But that kind of comes back to a big reason I think he did fall in the draft is that if things go well for Shedeur, in a team like Cleveland here, if things go well for him, he can play like an okay quarterback that has this massive fan base behind him, right? It puts the organization in a tough spot if like they think they're better off going for a higher upside swing at the quarterback position, and they've positioned themselves as they have, trying to build up the rest of the infrastructure, trading away Myles Garrett. They've kind of positioned themselves to move on from Shedeur already. And I think there's a part of them that, and I don't think it's really impacting Todd Monken's decision making, but I think there's a part of them that kind of knows like, crap, if Shedeur comes in and plays, and this would be like the best case scenario for Shedeur this year, is he plays like the 23rd best quarterback in the league. And we're looking at a young guy that has all these fans. Like, do we kind of talk ourselves into maybe they have the 4th pick in the draft. Do we kind of talk ourselves into this thing? But ultimately, we know he's never going to be good enough. There's a little bit of that. I don't know. It's such a complex conversation. And at this point, I do just kind of feel bad for Shedeur because this just ultimately is not... None of this, I think, has gone the way that it was going to be setting up for a best-case scenario for Shedeur to actually develop into, something like a decent starting 18th best quarterback in the league kind of guy. And there's a part of me that's pulling for him to get there, but I'm not projecting it. I'm not. And there's no denying that it was quite ugly with Shedeur. The tape was ugly for the vast majority of times. I think Shedeur fans will throw some of the stats and some of the bigger games that were largely dependent on catch and run types of plays. But the tape was ugly, and a lot of the underlying metrics will tell you that Shedeur was the worst quarterback in the NFL last year, even ahead of Dylan Gabriel, who also struggled and is severely limited as a quarterback. And honestly, that's kind of the extent of how much time I want to spend on this Browns quarterback room, even if there's a bunch of names here. You do have to mention Taylon Green, and I'm sorry to just kick this thing off with such a negative note. There are fun aspects of this team. The tone will change here, but it's a rough spot to kind of start with this team. But Taylon Green, man, like, this dude can't play quarterback. He's played almost 50 games in college. He's inaccurate. He makes erratic, bad decisions with the ball, does not read the field, horrible pocket presence, definition of bails out of clean pockets. He's just fast, and he does have a strong arm, but dude, he has a legitimate path to being a tight end in the NFL. If he just puts on 10 pounds and learns how to block and catch, it's not like that's unprecedented either. We've seen that with players before, whether it's at tight end or different positions. We saw it in Cleveland. Terrell Pryor became a really freaking good wide receiver. That's a great example of what Taylon Green could do with his career here. But he's already, I think, 23 going on 24 years old. Like, he doesn't have a ton of time to develop into a tight end because that's probably a 2-year project. But the crazy thing is, as we'll see in a minute, there's actually an opportunity to develop and earn a role as a tight end in this offense. And maybe his agent has told him and he just really wants to be an NFL quarterback or a UFL quarterback, and that's what you want to do, great. If you want to have a legitimate NFL career and you're Taylon Green, it's at a different position. I would love to be wrong. I would love for him to figure something out against NFL competition that he couldn't figure out in multiple stops at the college level. It just doesn't really feel like that's going to happen to me. But there is your quarterback room for the Browns. Again, it ranks 32nd. Stick with me, Browns fans. If you haven't clicked off already, there are positive aspects of this roster to build around and continue to get better here. But I do not think the starting quarterback of the 2027 Browns is on this team. That's my take. But let's go to the running back room, where things do shape up. And as you look at their offseason changes, they didn't make really any changes here at all, other than saying goodbye to Jerome Ford. And I hope he found the door on the way out, because he couldn't seem to find any holes when they were open for him in Cleveland. And what's left behind is a pretty exciting young running back room. Quinshon Judkins, to me, was a phenomenal running back prospect that really did get swept under the rug because it was a great running back class. Not just depth in that running back class, but you had Ashton Jeanty, you had a Marion Hampton, but Quinshon Judkins easily would have been RB2 in this draft and probably would have gone in the second round. I have a hard time believing the Seahawks would view Jadarian Price over what Quinshon Judkins was as a prospect, for example. And it's not like he goes much later in last year's class anyway. He goes to the very top of the second round. But I think from what we saw from Judkins on the field with the Browns, on a team that really did not have an infrastructure for the running back either, their blocking was horrible. We saw some really exciting moments from Judkins, and I think all the best things that I liked about him at Ohio State showed through. And it really hit me once he got into a Browns jersey. He's a lot like Nick Chubb. Full-size back with good breakaway speed, but the way that he has such excellent vision and he processes things so well. That's why the player he reminded me a lot of was Aaron Jones, who's always had just brilliant vision. Just the way that he kind of cuts through and sees opportunities between the tackles. We saw that in Cleveland. And then once I see him in the Browns jersey and doing it at that size, because he's a lot bigger than Aaron Jones, it hit me. I'm like, oh, he's very similar to Nick Chubb. And obviously, if he can reach that upside of a Nick Chubb, which I think is reasonable, given the guy has all the tools in the world, that's a dream. I mean, Nick Chubb is an all-decade type of running back, right? And Browns fans would take a second version of that. So that's the dream with Judkins. And I don't shy back from that. If they can put good blocking in front of him like Chubb had in some of those good Browns teams, I don't think that's unreasonable. But I really do think that, especially earlier in the year, we saw that type of runner. So I think the sky's the limit for him. I feel pretty good ranking him for a guy that, had a rocky first season in terms of was late to get started because of a really unfortunate off-field issue that I really just hope was a one-off thing. There was not really any sign that he was a character red flag in the draft. What I do know is that it definitely caught the Browns by surprise. They did not anticipate that this was someone with character red flags really at all. And it does seem to me like he has refocused and is heading in a good trajectory as we get back to the football conversation of it all. That's the dream, is a Nick Chubb pro comp, a player that has incredible physical tools, size, power, speed, paired with the rare vision he has. You can't ask for a whole lot more from a back in terms of a skill set. And we saw in those little moments where the Browns were able to have some success blocking for him, that he's got it on the football field. And then week 16, he breaks his leg and looked really bad at the time, but it is kind of counterintuitive sometimes. Broken legs, and this is where I'm not a doctor, but they're actually on the mid to lower end of long-term concerns in terms of injuries. It's not like a knee or smaller ligaments and stuff. It's once that bone heals, everything can kind of get strong back around it. We're seeing the same thing with Cam Scadaboo as well, doing backflips at a softball game right now in June. But I think there's plenty of reason to believe that Judkins is going to be back healthy and be fully healthy. And it's not like he had a huge workload coming out either, because he split carries with Henderson in college, which is kind of nice. Doesn't have a ton of wear on the tires. So there's a huge up arrow and positive trajectory here for Quinshon Judkins. Comes in with a very respectable 81 rating for me for a guy that didn't have a high yards per carry on a bad Browns team with a bad offensive line in front of him. I think the eye test was clearly passed for him, but a big up arrow on him as well to potentially become a top 5 to 10 running back in the league. Right now, with him and the rest of this room, I have the Browns ranked with a B- grade, 21st to 27th. There's a lot of good running backs in the NFL, and Judkins still has to climb up those ranks here. But it is a good starting point with him in this backfield. And very much baked into the unproven nature of this running back room as well is Judkins' running mate in Dylan Sampson, who ultimately, after getting some draft hype, I think ended up going around more of where I was comfortable with Sampson, top of day 3 of the draft. And I think now, next to Judkins, his projection in this backfield makes so much sense to me. I think you talk about change of pace all the time. I wouldn't say Sampson is necessarily faster than Judkins. Both these guys are pretty fast. But I do think he brings a change-up back type of guy where he can be a little bit more of a shifty, third down, almost receiving-oriented running back, and we started to see that last year. They actually really leaned into Sampson in the receiving game, something Tennessee didn't do a ton of with him, but he always showed that when they asked him to catch the ball, he could do it, and I think we're heading into 2026, like, I'm pretty damn intrigued by Sampson as that role, especially with Judkins being able to do kind of everything else. And very much kind of like what Julian Hill was in Todd Monken's offense in Baltimore, where you can get him running angle routes and wheel routes out of the backfield, make him a screen threat. Like, we haven't talked about the weaponry at large yet, but I think that's where Sampson showed his best stuff. And he had the big 66-yard catch and run against the Raiders from Shedeur there as well. As a runner, he didn't have many opportunities, just like Quinshon Judkins didn't, but he didn't have the power or even he's just not as good of a running back as Quinshon Judkins. So we saw even less efficiency from Sampson as a runner, and he just doesn't have the traits to overcome a situation like that. And I think that's why he's more of a fourth round style, running back. But I do think as a compliment to Judkins, as these guys kind of come up together in this Todd Monken offense, great. I think that works, and there's plenty of room for Sampson himself to, I would say, emerge something closer to what Justice Hill. Did I say Julian earlier? Justice Hill has become in Baltimore, where he's just a nice, quote unquote, change of pace back to Derrick Henry. And worth keeping around next to your lead guy. And then you don't have a whole lot of names beyond that. Raheem Sanders did play last year. He's got size, he's got speed, but he's a slow starter. He doesn't change directions well. He's a one-track player. He's in this archetype of like really poor man's Derrick Henry's, which feels like we get one or two of these every year at this point. Obviously, Monken has familiarity with Derrick Henry, so maybe he'll see some of that in him. But as a, maybe like what Gordon is in Miami that we talked about in the Dolphins deep dive, as a true short yardage back, get me a yard, get me 2 yards. Maybe he can develop his pass protection and be more of that role as well, because Sanders has shown the ability to catch the ball when they throw him the ball, but not a lot of dynamism in the receiving game. But as an RB3 and another young back for these three guys to come up together, sure, that works for me. And then you have kind of undrafted types after that. So there's your running back room. This is where we start to get into some of the youth and where this team is drafted well and some of the future optimism. Still a lot to prove there again as they rank in a cluster towards the kind of, near the bottom third of the league there, but 21st to 27th at running back. That would be a nice green light for this Browns team to hit this year in what could be, surprise, a bit of a rough season ahead. But let's turn the page to the weapons for the Browns. More of a busy offseason here with the wide receiver and tight end rooms. Not necessarily in terms of losses. At wide receiver, they really lose nobody. And then they were busy in the draft, bringing in additions here. The very speedy Casey Concepcion out of Texas A&M, along with the big physical Denzel Boston, a nice Thunder and Lightning addition to the wide receiver room. And then Tylan Wallace is going to roll up into a Todd Monken suitcase and come over to Cleveland as well. So I do say upgraded. Hard not to when you don't lose anybody and invest that much in your wide receiver room. And then at tight end, David Njoku gone. With how injured he was last year, both missing games and playing hurt, I actually couldn't bring myself to say that is anything other than an unsubstantial loss. He just really was not a factor for the Browns last year, but hopefully for his sake, he can be better in years moving forward. But we're just looking at last year's edition of the Browns, and again, Njoku, really not a factor on it. And then more day three style additions, Joe Royer, Carson Ryan, Royer in the 5th round out of Cincinnati, and Ryan out of BYU down there in the last round of the draft. And then Jack Stoll, someone I'm going to talk a little bit about here as well for his blocking impact. Viewers of the channel know that Jack stole my heart as a day 3 sleeper back in whatever draft was his coming out. He's a hard-nosed blocker that's kept a job in the league for that reason. So nothing too major here. I'd settled on neutral at tight end. This combination of players compared to Njoku, it's minutia. You're hoping, I guess, in time with those rookies, someone clicks and that's an upgrade. But I did just say neutral, pretty minor in terms of tight end additions there. But let's take a look at their weaponry and dive into it. So just off the bat, I have Cleveland ranked fairly low for weaponry, 23rd to 27th in the NFL. But I do have the wild card icon next to them. And that's to say that this is a pivotal factor for this team, not just for this season, but certainly for beyond as well. But also to say, like, there's legit upside here, which shouldn't come as a surprise considering how many young players are here. But there's just so many unproven commodities. But in what, is a season that's not going to have a lot of expectations, it's going to be just fun to observe these wide receivers and hopefully see them settle in and get better as the year goes on. And also to learn how Todd Monken's going to be able to lean into and scheme up routes and scheme these guys open. So let's get into it. Before we do talk about younger players, Jerry Jeudy is still here. They extended him when they acquired him, and he's going to be here, and he is very highly paid, and he actually is a part of the wild card equation here. While everyone else is a little bit more unproven and uncertain for their youth, Jerry Jeudy is unproven and uncertain in the sense that who the hell knows what version of Jerry Jeudy we're going to get. I mean, he has been up and down, not just here in Cleveland, but going back to his time in Denver. And we've seen that, man. 2 years here in Cleveland. Year 1, horrible start. Looked like a brutal addition to the Browns. And then he finished the second half of the year legitimately as one of the top 10 wide receivers in the NFL for the second half of the 2024 season. I talked about that in last year's Browns Deep Dive. He turned it on, and it looked like he was turning a corner, and the Browns were right about that contract. And then a fairly similar thing happened again this year. I don't know if it's enough to call that a trend where he just sucks for the first 2 months and then eventually remembers how to catch the football. But he had a brutal drop rate, really was one of the worst wide receivers, if not the worst, in the entire NFL until about November, where I would say he stopped dropping the ball and was playing better. At that point, Shedeur was starting. Everything was broken on this team. Everything was lost. It's hard to say he played well inside of that, but he wasn't actively holding this team back. So he gets the yellow arrow for me, Jerry Jeudy, in that we just don't know what version we're going to get from him on a weekly basis, on a monthly basis, and certainly on a season's basis. This could easily be his last year here. If he continues to show the same issues he did, it could go as far as him getting loosely benched because of the additions at these with these other wide receivers, or he might just happen to be a great member of what could be a really exciting group of weapons, because Jerry Jeudy is still relatively young. He was super young when he came into the league. He's only 27 years old. He just turned 27 on April 24th. So like he still could have a future here if he settles in. And look, I'll still defend Jerry Jeudy as a unique athlete, one of the better route runners in the NFL. He can get open. It's just the inconsistency. Can't seem to get out of his own way, and he really is, this sort of like role-playing game, like min-maxed wide receiver, probably how you'd build a wide receiver in Madden, where like route running, separation, even some of the shiftiness after the catch at times can be pretty good. Pretty much maxed out, but hands, catching traffic, like a spectacular catch might be a little bit higher on him. He can make some nice catches at times, but catching traffic, for example, if we're using the video game analogy, like the equivalent of a bad running back that just drops the ball all the time. But that's Jerry Jeudy. And then you have these two rookies, extremely different players, Thunder and Lightning. And honestly, they draft Casey Concepcion first. I had these guys very close in the draft, but I did have Denzel Boston a little bit ahead of Concepcion, and it really just comes down to stylistic preferences. The beauty is the Browns give both of them, and it doesn't really matter who you liked more, because both these guys are going to play entirely different roles and theoretically will have an opportunity to both be the best versions of themselves here. And wide receiver is all about constructing complementary skill sets, having guys play off each other. And this is the definition of doing that. So whether they drafted Concepcion or Boston first, it ultimately does not matter. And I love how these two fit together. And where I was originally going with that is when they drafted Concepcion, I was like, well, he's kind of like Jerry Jeudy, and even further down the board, Isaiah Bond a little bit more. It feels like they have all these speed types of wide receivers, and they haven't historically worked out for the Browns. I would have preferred Denzel Boston was my draft take after the first night of the draft. And then they get Denzel Boston, and it's like, ooh, they can have their cake and eat it too. And if Jerry Jeudy figures it out, that's house money. But Jerry Jeudy all of a sudden isn't as important to figure things out on this team. It puts a lot of pressure on Jeudy to get his act together. But yeah, really fun duo here. We can spend a little bit more time on them individually, though. Like Casey Concepcion in his 2024 season at NC State showed that he can absolutely be a gadget player. They threw him a lot of bubble screens, and he's got the shiftiness, the creativity after the catch. He's not very big. Like, I don't think he's an elite run after catch player. I don't. It just kind of depends what areas of the field you're tapping into him with. Like, his catch and run speed and ability to make guys miss is really good, but he does go down on first contact quite a bit. He doesn't have like incredible contact balance or anything like that, but he's a plus player after the catch, and you can absolutely throw him bubble screens, do the gadget stuff with him, jet sweeps, crossers, that type of stuff. But that's just kind of like an underlying utility for him. He actually proved this year at Texas A&M, like, he can beat press. He has the speed to create vertical stack. Tracking the ball and consistently catching the ball down the field is what's going to ultimately determine and unlock his upside. I would say there's plenty of examples of him being that guy that can see the ball over his shoulder and that he is comfortable doing that. That's where I think is probably the hardest thing for a receiver to just have, is that like those natural ball skills to adjust their tempo and track the ball over the shoulder and not be bothered by DBs swarming around him down the field. Like, he's got it in him. He's not that big, so like a little bit of contact can throw him off, and his catch radius isn't huge or anything like that. But, you think of like Jalen Waddle at times or Tyreek Hill. Something about those guys as great vertical threats is they can go up and make tough catches if you ask them to deep down the field. Maybe not as consistently as even like Denzel Boston here or someone like that will convert contested catches. But the idea is half the time they'll be wide open and it's not going to matter anyway. So he's got that whole package where he's maybe not necessarily going to contribute as much, is going to be physical play on the boundary, run blocking, which does matter. Some of those more like just like Jimmys and Joes versus X's and O's, 3rd and 8s. Sometimes it's really nice in the NFL to just throw a back shoulder on your second read towards the sideline to a 6'4" wide receiver that can box out a DB and make a catch, or down in the red zone. It can be really nice to just have a big body to throw the ball to. There's areas that Casey Concepcion just can't hang, and there's certain routes that he's going to struggle with if he deals with more physical coverage. That's where Denzel Boston comes in. Goes, dig routes against zone coverage, back shoulders. Denzel Boston's really good at it. He really is, and he's not the fastest guy, he's not the twitchiest guy, but I did end up really liking him because I think he has enough. And a player he reminded me almost to a T is Mike Williams, and I think Denzel Boston can be that here for the Browns. So you can easily see how these two guys play into each other. And if the quarterback play can get right here, this could really be a dynamic 1-2 punch that we even look back on and it's like, these guys are both awesome. It doesn't even really matter who got drafted first. Like, these two guys are perfect for each other. But that's a best case scenario. The Browns have invested in a lot of different wide receivers and it hasn't always worked out. And we know how important having a good quarterback is to get the most out of these wide receivers. So hopefully we can reach that point someday. But for now, we know what sort of strengths and weaknesses these guys are bringing to the table. And then let's just continue going through the starters here, because Harold Fannin is actually part wide receiver. And I do have an interesting conversation with Cory about how he's maybe going to be utilized with Njoku gone, with a new staff coming in, because last year Fannin had this incredible rookie season, and hate to sound full of myself, but you're welcome if you drafted Harold Fannin in your fantasy leagues or your dynasty leagues, because he was a top 50 player in the draft for me. I called this one of the steals of the draft, where he goes in the third round. Love Harold Fannin, and the Browns ended up using him exactly like I said. I called him a slower version of Brock Bowers, where you don't want him as your inline Y tight end. The same conversation we just had last deep dive with Brock Bowers about all the different places you can line him up. That all applies to Harold Fannin. And the Browns recognized that and leaned into it and made him their best wide receiver last year, or best receiver. But yes, a lot of that came as a wide receiver from the slot or outside in 3-by-1 formations, and from 12 personnel, oftentimes using him off the wing where he's in space a little bit more, matched up on safeties as opposed to linebackers and especially defensive ends, where Harold Fannin's about 240 pounds and he's pretty maxed out. He's about 6'2 and a half, 6'3 in high heels, maybe. He's just not built to be a full inline wide tight end in terms of workload. And you also just can't use him in the areas that he's best, from out routes, from the slot. Run after catch is so easy to tap into off of play action from those wing players that you can often set in motion or have coming cross formation. Whereas you really do want that actual inline, full-sized wide tight end that's more of an extension of your offensive line to actually be your starting tight end. And that's going to be the question here for me with Harold Fannin, because they said goodbye to Njoku. For the most part, their investments were not at a true impact run blocking tight end like we're seeking for here. So let's actually go down that path for a second. Blake Whiteheart might be that guy. He's been adequate as a run blocker. Jack Stoll ends up being someone that they do sign in free agency. I like Jack Stoll. It's become more of a bit than anything on this channel. He's bounced around for a reason. He hasn't been a dominant run blocker. He hasn't really reached his potential as a John Bates or Josh Oliver, who play those true, blocking specialist roles. So maybe he can take advantage of another opportunity to do that here. But are you really moving things around to get Blake Whiteheart and Jack Stoll on the field? Maybe, maybe not. And I think there's an argument to be made that there's a lot of formations that those guys are going to be more beneficial to your offense than having Harold Fannin try to dig out defensive ends, which actually really matters. I mean, if Harold Fannin is being asked to block, let's say Myles Garrett now, because he's no longer on the Browns, or even just your average NFL defensive end, man, you try to run to him on the strong side, he's going to lose that block. You are going to have penetration into the backfield. You are going to be exposing Judkins and these backs to having to make someone miss. And more often than not, that's going to leave you in 2nd and 9, 2nd and 11. And that just has a trickle-down effect on your quarterback play, on your, everything. You want to stay ahead of the chains. And as much as I love Harold Fannin, that's just not who he is. It's not. He's a pretty good blocker on the move as a move tight end, even a fullback, blocking slot corners and stuff, but not in a traditional sense. So that's kind of what I'm getting at here is, going back to Harold Fannin for a second, is I think if Harold Fannin, and this almost gets into a fantasy football conversation with Fannin, because I think long-term he's going to be just fine. He's a hell of a football player. But if we're just talking about this year, I think to get the most out of Harold Fannin as an impact to your team and in terms of production, it's through 12 personnel in the ways that we've described using him. But if you're trying to design this offense, are you looking at this and saying, we got to get Blake Whiteheart and Jack Stoll out there so that we can run 12 personnel to get the most out of Harold Fannin? Are those good enough players in that wide tight end role? Are they good enough run blockers to justify that? I don't have a yes or no answer for you on there. I think the answer is probably maybe. But it is a point of fascination for me, just in terms of assessing Todd Monken's decision with how to use these guys and everything. As a football nerd, I find that to be a fascinating conversation. But I think the final point there would be, if you are thinking at this from a fantasy football angle, Harold Fannin might see a downtick in production this year, not just because they have more guys to throw to, but because it's a little bit less cut and dry to be such a 12 personnel type of team. New coaching staff. Stefanski very much came from that Shanahan style 12 personnel mindset, and you just have a different room here. You look at this team and you actually would say, yeah, this is probably better as like a 2x2 spread type of offense. That Todd Monken has absolutely done that type of stuff before, and has done it, by the way, with someone like Isaiah Likely. But as we've seen with Isaiah Likely, there wasn't the consistent impact on the game from a guy like that than we saw from like Harold Fannin last year on the Browns in a different infrastructure. So I think what I don't want this to be confused as is me being lower on Harold Fannin, the football player. That could not be further from the case. Anybody that followed my draft analysis knows I freaking love this guy. I think he is a unique mismatch problem for defenses for a lot of the same reasons we talked about with Brock Bowers in the Raiders deep dive. But I will actually say I'm probably not going to end up with him in a lot of my fantasy leagues because it gets a little bit clunky here, at least for now. But let's go ahead and move on and talk about a little bit more of the depth. So Cedric Tillman is here. I actually just created that little TC logo down there for the video watchers here, not the podcast folks. Shout out to you guys listening through the Fully Inflated Football podcast. But yeah, that's a trade candidate marker. And I think Cedric Tillman, I'd be making phone calls about. If I needed a wide receiver 4, if I needed even a starting X who's not going to see a ton of targets, but would round out a room with that type of skill set, I'd be making calls. He's in the last year of his deal. He's dealt with some injuries here in Cleveland and got swallowed up by the mess that was the Cleveland Browns of 2025. But he's shown moments of being a nice player, and the Browns clearly don't have a future for him here. So would not be stunned if someone acquired him for a 6th-round pick or something like that. But he's nice depth at this point, so that's good. Isaiah Bond as well. With KC Concepcion coming in, Isaiah Bond is pretty useless at this point because Concepcion's just a better version of Isaiah Bond, who fell out of the draft due to off-field concerns. And honestly, if Cleveland's really trying to like turn a new page and develop a winning culture, I'm not in that building. I can't speak to Isaiah Bond, but there's a lot of noise and stuff with him. And just from a like special teams, run blocking angle, like, having 3 tiny wide receivers, Jerry Jeudy, Concepcion, and Isaiah Bond, that gets a little overly redundant. And you might lean towards keeping like a Tylan Wallace, for example, who is following Monken over, who's got a little bit more size and played 69 snaps of kick coverage last year. Like I would imagine, I know I listed him lower there. Maybe hindsight, I would flip it, but like I would imagine Wallace is more of a lock to make this roster than Bond. And then you continue to have some fascinating names competing for roster spots here. Malachi Corley is a gadget player. He's part running back, but is in consideration as a kick returner for them, and is a little bit more size and physicality in there. Jamari Thrash is very much in that like mold of slender, speedy, route running style wide receivers that, again, just like they seem to kind of strike out with these types, and he has done nothing here. But was an intriguing prospect. And I'm actually interested in Aaron Anderson as well, especially because they don't have that solidified return guy here. Aaron Anderson could get into the mix there depending on how much they want to use Casey Concepcion in that role. But I don't know. There was a lot of LSU wide receivers in this draft, and Aaron Anderson probably caught my eye the most, to be honest. Like I thought he passed the eye test the most, but he ran a lot slower than you would expect. And he is a shorter wide receiver, but I thought he was like baby Jamar Chase, like in that LSU jersey, like really good after the catch, snappy route runner, like looked like a good football player to me. It's just was a crowded room and he's smaller, but, I think it's a fun addition as an undrafted pickup. But yeah, it will be fascinating to see which of these wide receivers make it. We can go back to the tight end room. We kind of dismissed in some ways Joe Royer and Carson Ryan in that whole Harold Fannin conversation. It would be great if Joe Royer or even Carson Ryan as a 7th round pick just were awesome wide tight ends, and that solves that, and they're going to run a lot of 12 personnel with those guys. Joe Royer is very slender in his lower half. He was hard to watch as a run blocker at Cincinnati. He is more speed and run after catch ability and more receiver than he is blocker. I would be quite stunned if he edges out either Whiteheart or Stoll as a blocker in that sort of conversation. That's not to say Royer doesn't have upside or that he can't bulk up in his lower half and become a better run blocker. I am pretty comfortable saying that it would be a surprise if that happened in his rookie season. And then Carson Ryan's just a little bit of a wild card there. I wouldn't be stunned, I guess, if Carson Ryan's surprised, but late stage breakout in his college career. He's a little bit of a unique, like he's 6'3", 255, so he's got the mass to hang in there as a blocker. I wouldn't necessarily say he had great run blocking at BYU, but he's maybe not the best athlete and kind of caught in between. You either want to be really good as a blocker or really athletic as a receiving threat, and he's maybe a little bit caught in between and maybe more of just a guy at tight end, but 7th round pick for a reason, but we'll see, I suppose. Royer out of that tight end group, though, definitely the one that I think has the most developmental upside to maybe be a, nice compliment as more of a Y to Fannin. And then we could touch on the running backs again. I feel like we covered that pretty well with like Dylan Sampson, especially. You could even make a case that Sampson should be up there on the screen instead of Judkins. But Sampson's emergence, I feel like, really came through once Judkins was injured. So more like to be determined there. Judkins definitely a better pass blocker than Sampson right now. So for third down work, it'll probably be a pretty split between those guys. I do think Judkins, anytime either the Browns or Ohio State has thrown him the ball, he's shown he can do it. I wouldn't say he's got shortcomings there. He's not like this crazy route runner or is not prolific, efficiency over the years or anything like that, but there's probably more to be unlocked there, and he's very solid. So no complaints with what they're getting with really Judkins and Sampson as receiving backs either. And that is your Browns group of weapons. It is a fun group, and you can see why the wild card is there. There's 3 up arrows there with Casey Concepcion, Denzel Boston, Harold Fannin. Jerry Jeudy has upside in his own right if you want to take the optimistic spin on it. This is an area that you're hoping the infrastructure is good enough that these guys can be just good versions of themselves. They don't need to be the best versions of themselves quite yet, but you definitely want to walk out of this like goal number 1 is Concepcion and Boston look good. Those look like draft hits. And I would say too, like Monken found a way to really lean into Harold Fannin Jr. And there isn't any noise about, did he regress or does this staff really know how to use this kind of unique skill set, which to Stefanski's credit really did last year. So those are the 2 things to really keep an eye on here in a fascinating group of weapons. And then we have the offensive line, which their offseason changes graphic looks unlike any position group we'll probably see this year and maybe ever. Just a complete reset on this offensive line. A lot of people bringing that up, that they're not going to have a single repeat starter from last year. And it's true. They're getting rid of everybody. And honestly, I think it's great because there was a time, maybe 2021, where this was one of the most highly praised O-lines. You would see this series, the Browns would consistently rank top 3 or 4 for O-line. That was a core identity of the Browns offense. And they just weren't able to replicate that with the same players. For the most part, you had some different pieces moving in and out, but you had guys getting older and regressing, or in the case of like a Jack Conklin, getting older, regressing, and unable to stay healthy. And it just was time to say goodbye to it's like the old band that isn't quite as good as they once were. It's time to be out with the old, in with the new, and just start fresh and turn the page, like, completely. And I respect it. Now, there might be some bumps along the roads as they sort this thing out, but I really do love what they did. And it was a full send in terms of, it's not like they just said goodbye to all these guys and then didn't invest much or didn't bring new guys in. No, far from it. They did everything. They made trades for someone like Titus Howard from the Texans. They made signings for a decent amount of money for guys like Elton Jenkins and Zion Johnson. They spent draft picks on Spencer Fano in the first round, their first pick, Austin Barber, Parker Brailsford. Full scale additions there, retaining just a couple of guys that were still on the team from last year. And then, the list of departures: Joel Bitonio, Wyatt Teller, Ethan Pochich, Jack Conklin, Cam Robinson, and Cornelius Lucas, all gone. And I do say upgraded on the offensive line. I'm relatively optimistic that they can put this thing together and get it in a better spot. Now, that's most teams, to be fair. Like, we're going to show this year. The Browns still rank 30th for me at O-line. Still like a workable, respectable overall grade on it. C grade there. I think it's practical with certainly question marks and areas for upside there. It does get the wild card icon on it as well. So it's, them coming in 30th, I think is more of a reflection of like the league really understands this at this point. There used to be, even like 5 years ago, felt like teams just wouldn't make that hard push to improve their O-line like a team like Cleveland has done here. A team like Houston has really focused on it. Just kind of placing these rankings and sorting all these teams out. It feels like the worst O-lines in the league now are maybe a little bit better than they were maybe 4 years ago or so. And I think that's being reflected here. Like 30th does feel low to me on Cleveland, but I also don't know who I would necessarily put them above. And I do definitely think there are some question marks and areas that this could still go wrong. But overall, like I like what they've done here and think they can get this going in the right trajectory and even this year have it better than it's been the last couple of years, which would be really good news for Browns fans. And another really nice green light for this team to hit in a transition season. But anyway, let's go through these guys. So at left tackle, you have the rookie Spencer Fano. Very reasonable pick. Would not have been my choice for the first lineman and tackle off the board, personally. Fano was my fourth offensive tackle, but it was a really tight-knit group, and they all had, Maui Noah and Freeling and Miller. Those guys all went within 10 picks of each other, and they all had strengths and weaknesses, pros and cons. Fano was the most versatile, and I think his pass protection tape gave him probably the highest floor, but also he does have shorter arms that arm length discourse can be certainly obnoxious at times. I will say this, there were moments where Fano's reach and arm length did impact his game, similar to what we talk about with like Will Campbell. I don't think they're entirely dissimilar as prospects, Fano and Will Campbell, but that still does not mean this was a bad pick by the Browns. And he's going to kick from right tackle over to left tackle, and I think give them a decent baseline. Like I said, his floor as a pass blocker is very nice. Moves his feet really well, really good usage with his hands, and a relatively solid anchor. And then as a run blocker, that his ceiling as a run blocker is actually probably higher than what it is as a pass blocker, where I don't think the length matters quite as much, and his athleticism can really be weaponized at the next level. That's where Fano's kind of fascinating, because Utah's system in his final year really crippled how much Fano could get off the ball, get downfield. They ran a lot of 2-point stance, spread offense stuff, a lot of RPOs where he literally cannot get down the field because of the rules. You would get an illegal man downfield, so he had to be a little bit more passive off the ball. I think that really hurt what we were able to see from him from a run blocking perspective. One of my biggest regrets from draft season was not going back to watch him in 2024, where he had a monster run block grade, and clearly things were different. Like his run block tape from last year was just underwhelming, but I think it was much more about the scheme. So there's a lot of potential for him to be kind of weaponized with his athleticism in the run game. But yeah, he's a fun prospect. He was a good draft pick. Comes in, gives them a nice floor at left tackle, in my opinion. And just like any young tackle, going to be tested, going to be challenged. A lot of opportunity to climb up in the rankings and show us what he's got. And then you have Zion Johnson at left guard. I don't need to spend too much time on Zion Johnson. He has really disappointed as a first-round pick for the Chargers. Someone that I can hold my hand up and say, I was just too high on Zion Johnson, as were the Chargers, who spent like the 16th pick in the draft on him. His lack of size just has led to too many deficiencies. But he's still landed as like a solid starting guard worthy of, $8-9 million or whatever he got in free agency for a couple years. Sure, plug that in at left guard, if nothing else, as a placeholder starter as you figure everything else out. Then you have Elton Jenkins at center. And I love Elton Jenkins. I'm a Packers fan, very familiar with him. I don't love Elton Jenkins at center. He's never really felt super comfortable there. He's been best as a guard. Especially as a run blocker. Things just have never really connected for him in terms of being that pivot point, getting off the snap, having to snap the ball, and being able to also tap into his physical ability there. In terms of pass pro, you're still not going to really see him as an interior offensive lineman get like obliterated one-on-one. That's just not something you're really going to do against Elton Jenkins very often. But I do think he also just struggled with like blitz pickup and stunts and twists a little bit more, having to call that stuff out as a center. Not that he couldn't improve at it in time. He only started about 7 games before getting hurt again in Green Bay last year, the year they moved him to center. But it definitely was notable that Josh Myers, who isn't as good of a one-on-one pass blocker, they let him go. Elton Jenkins steps into center. They were getting beat on loops and blitzes a lot more when Jenkins was in there, and really all season long. But it's a situation where he can play center. He's not proven to be good at everything as a center. And I think he's better as a guard. And the Browns have certainly not locked him in as a center. They've said this is an ongoing evaluation. We're going to build the best O-line in the best way we can. So that's just how it's currently projected and how I'm displaying it on the screen here. I think in an ideal world, if we're talking about the center position, Luke Whippler, who ended up starting the last 6 games or so of the year last year and held his own, wasn't amazing. It wasn't like he won the job for 2026 or anything like that, but showed some promise as a guy that was not a bad prospect coming out of Ohio State. Or even Parker Brailsford, who just did it at Alabama. He's undersized. Honestly, I didn't see a huge difference between like Parker Brailsford and Logan Jones, who got all the hype in this center class seemingly out of Iowa. I thought Jones was better, but Brailsford was the same idea, as just like a smart, athletic, undersized center. So if either of those guys could look great in camp and you start talking about Elton Jenkins being a guard, I would like him even better there. And then there's also the injury concerns on Elton Jenkins, by the way, has started to miss a lot of time. And the Packers just couldn't justify the risk of bringing him back at his current contract, which was going to be like $20 million, with the fact that he has slowed down, has not been the same as a run blocker, even when he was at guard, and is into his 30s now, a risk to get hurt again. And that is considered with him as well. But I still like the signing a lot. And I think Browns fans are going to be really happy to have Elton Jenkins, whether he gets better as a center with more time to develop there, or ends up back at guard. Just has to stay healthy, as does the right guard here, Tevin Jenkins. He's the definition of really good injury-prone player. And it got so bad with him on the Bears that they just eventually gave up on trying to count on him year in, year out. He hits free agency and it effectively becomes a free addition for the Browns. And he's kind of started on and off, and it's been more of the same. This dude's an ass kicker when he's on the field. Nasty run blocker, but really strong, good anchor and pass block, in pass protection as well. His body just betrays him. He's like, in many ways, like the Jason Verrett of guards. So are you counting on Tevin Jenkins to play all 17 games for you? I certainly can't project him to do that. That would be statistically improbable based on his career. If he can get through a full year healthy year and prove that he can do that, great. We can change that conversation. But while he looks pretty on the screen right now, he is probably the biggest question mark out of all these players just from an availability standpoint. And then Titus Howard is a nice addition as well. I almost look at him and Elton Jenkins as very similar level additions, where they are super flexible in terms of positional versatility, guys at relatively similar spots in their career, and honestly, two guys that are much better pass blockers than run blockers. Howard has never been a great run blocker. Jenkins just feels like he's lost a little bit to get off the ball and show that athleticism. But, I think they probably overpaid for Howard a little bit for what he is. He's kind of roughly in that sort of like Dan Moore realm of conversation where he is a starting tackle in the NFL. If you ranked all 64 at the end of any given season, he's probably in the 40s or 50s. Like he's going to take his losses. Howard's probably a better pass blocker than a Dan Moore, but not as good of a run blocker. So that's kind of the trade-off in that specific conversation. But a reasonable addition to, again, raise the floor here. And then you're not done because there's depth pieces worth mentioning, especially with some of the guys at tackle right now. Two behemoths of human beings. DeJuan Jones he's a particularly large man, incredible wingspan. He is one of the retained players on this Browns O-line. He gets a bad rap because there were some expectations, and I'm guilty of it. I thought he could maybe be a starter in the league. He just doesn't have the footwork to be a consistent starter. But as a swing tackle, and the Browns have had to ask him to start a lot of games because of the state that this O-line's been in, just by the sheer thought of DeJuan Jones as this big, strong guy with strong hands, he's a really hard player to get around. You can do it if you're crafty enough or quick enough, but he's a practical pass blocker and a very practical backup if you need a backup tackle. And then you have Austin Barber, who was a very strong kind of ass kicker on Florida's O-line. I had him as a, kind of early day 3 candidate as a swing tackle in the NFL, and they took him in the 3rd, little bit early for me because I don't like his feet. I think for different reasons you're going to run into the same problem with DeJuan Jones, where you're just, from an athletic standpoint, I guess it's kind of a similar problem. They're different, a little bit different builds, but I just have a hard time seeing Austin Barber being able to move at tackle well enough to be left on an island consistently week in, week out. And you ever feel good about that? And if I'm drafting a tackle on day 2 of the draft, I do prefer a guy that has actual starting upside. I just don't see that in Austin Barber. And he's pretty tall to be a guard. We've seen more 6'7" guards in the NFL than ever before. Maybe that could be Austin Barber, but that's still kind of an outlier to do that. So I do like him as depth. They paid a little bit too much for my liking on him, but not the end of the world. And he is an ass kicker in the run game. I'll give him that. And then you have KT Leviston as well, who would be another Austin Barber-esque conversation. We've seen a little bit of him at this point. Brutal pass blocker, but pretty good in run blocking. They clearly didn't love what they had in him because of all the other pieces they brought in here, and he's not a guarantee to make this team. The rest of those guys would be certainly a surprise if they made this team at this point. In terms of interior depth, you got we talked about the centers. Luke Whippler and Brailsford are center-only options and in the mix for the starting job at center. But you have Zach Zinter, who was a good prospect that just broke his leg at Michigan and just hasn't been able to get back on that trajectory. And he has played a little bit here. This is a big year for Zach Zinter to show that he can hang in the NFL. I liked him enough as a prospect that I'll put the eyes on him, and I'm not going to give up on him quite yet. Because if Whippler and Brailsford don't win that center job and Tevin Jenkins gets hurt, Zach Zinter might have to step in and play guard, and we'll see what that can look like. And it ideally would be a much higher floor infrastructure with Zinter stepping in that he can learn and develop a little bit more, whereas right now when he's been asked to play, it's been in the middle of a shitstorm. So that's always bad for young player development. You got Kendrick Green, who's had his ups and downs, to say the least, along with Tyree Phillips. Those guys have kind of bounced around and had some decent moments at times, but more bad than good. And Kingsley Iguakin as well was in Detroit. And he's a decent pass-blocking guy that can play a little bit of center as well. Probably someone they might stash on the practice squad. But yeah, it's a long conversation with this offensive line. A lot of moving pieces, obviously. A decent enough starting point that, again, I think is better. I don't think. I can say this is a better offensive line than it's been the last 2 years. But you're certainly hoping you hit some green lights here, and this group looks better by the end of the year, just like we talked about with real hit weapons and the running back. And I didn't mention it either for the audio listeners, but the Browns for pass blocking ranked 24th to 28th, and for run blocking they ranked 29th. So those two together make it sound a little bit better, and that passes more in my mind for where I view this team. It's just that did come together as the 30th offensive line. Like I said, a lot of teams are doing things better with the O-line, and Cleveland's one of them here. So we'll see where this lands by the end of the year. But that does conclude the offensive breakdown for the Cleveland Browns. And this is our 32nd ranked offense. It had to be somebody. When you have the worst quarterback room in the league, that's going to hurt. And then so much youth, so many other questions across the board. We're talking about a transition year here for Cleveland, especially post-Myles Garrett trade. I would say the primary objective for this offense is yearly development. Monken looks like the right guy. You check some boxes with these young players, and maybe you finish, 27th on offense in the league. I think that's a reasonable expectation and hope that can absolutely happen. And if it does, I wouldn't be too dejected if I were a Browns fan, because this has been such a brutal offense the last few years. They were 31st last year, scoring 16.4 points per game. And that's only because Las Vegas existed and they scored 14 points per game. But if you can get up to 27th, or let's go a step further. Let's say 26th. That was over 20 points a game. It's an extra 4 points per game compared to what they did last year. That would be an absolute, I hate to say best case scenario and just get Browns fans to just stop watching the season and say, well, there's no hope if our best case is 20 points a game and 26 best scoring offense in the league. But if you want to be realistic about what a good outcome for this offense would be, I think that's what we're talking about there. But let's go to the defensive side of things. And honestly, this has all happened very fast. I'm literally recording this the night of the Myles Garrett trade. And it's kind of hitting me right now. Like, I think this conversation's actually more interesting because it's not just like, well, yeah, they're going to be a good defense because they have Myles Garrett. Now it's more like, all right, there's a new coordinator. Jared Verse is younger and stepping in here. And now it's more like, what are we building for the long-term plan here? I do think this makes a lot more sense with the trade that the Browns made. And that does take me to the defensive line, where we start the defensive breakdown up front. And we'll look at those offseason changes, where, of course, you're going to see that big trade. They send Myles Garrett to the Rams. They get Jared Verse back, and I tweeted this out. But this can't get swept under the rug. Like, Jared Verse is a really, really, really freaking good player. And while the Browns did drop down, this isn't like, an egregious downgrade. It's a major downgrade. You're going from defensive player of the year, quite possibly the best defensive player to ever do it, to just like a superstar Pro Bowl caliber edge rusher that's been top 5 in pressures the last 2 years. Like, still a downgrade, don't get me wrong. But the fact that he was a part of that trade, I think really makes this make sense for Cleveland. I think it does. So obviously at edge, you're going to be talking about a downgrade. That was really the only thing that happened. They did lose Cam Thomas, who played okay for them, but it's for what Cam Thomas is. They have other guys that can do that. In terms of the interior defensive line, I said neutral. Shelby Harris has actually had a nice 3 years here in Cleveland. But they bring in Kalia Davis from San Francisco. Pretty minor with the interior D-line for the most part. So I said neutral with the interior, and again, downgraded at edge. But yeah, like I said, man, this is not a end of the world scenario for the Browns defense this year. And long term, like I said, it makes a lot of sense with Verse being 25. But still, when you look at the D-line rankings, they still come in just inside the top 10 of D-lines for me. It's still a good defensive line to build this defense around. They come in a pretty big cluster of B-graded pass rushes, 7th to 14th, and 10th to 15th for D-line run defense, where they rank with a B grade there as well. So it's an above average, good defensive line still that is now going to focus around the new best player on your defense, Jared Verse. There's some other guys in the mix there, but if you're talking about the impact that a superstar defensive lineman can have, then yeah, from a impact, best player, most valuable player, it's Jared Verse, and Jared Verse is going to get a massive contract here in a couple of years. But he's awesome, man, and I don't want to undersell that for the Browns and for the Browns fans. And I think Browns fans, yes, you're going to miss Myles Garrett. You're going to fall in love with Jared Verse really quickly. And I think on the open market, especially, I said they're going to have to pay him a lot of money eventually, but not for the first couple of years. He's only on the third year of his rookie deal. He's got the fifth-year option. It's going to give you some added cap wiggle room. But if he was on the open market, he himself would have been worth 2 first-round picks. So you get that plus a late first, presumably from the Rams next year. You get a second rounder the year after that, a third rounder the year after that. It's a really good return for Myles Garrett, man. But let's talk about Verse here on this Browns team. He is one of the best bull rushers in the NFL. I think you would say Myles Garrett is probably above him. That might be it. That might be the end of the list. This dude's get off, an ability to get up and under your pads, drive you back. It's top shelf. Now, he certainly doesn't have the full breadth of athletic movement skills that Browns fans have been so blessed to see with Myles Garrett. Nobody does. So, yeah, for a bigger, stronger edge, he's not, he doesn't have that bend. He's not really going to turn the corner. And you actually see at times, he's going to miss some sacks because as an athlete out in space, the quicker quarterbacks can sidestep him, and you're going to be counting on some of these other guys to clean stuff up a little bit more, where Verse is going to cause that havoc and disrupt the play, but he's maybe not going to end as many plays as someone like Myles Garrett. But from a disruptive point of view, like I said, he's top 5 in pressures the last 2 years, and he's only been in the league for 2 years. So there is room for him to incrementally work on his game a little bit. I don't know that he's going to get too much better than he currently is. But this is definitely a Pro Bowl level top 10 edge rusher. And by the way, he's not just a power rusher. He is really good with his arms in terms of using swipes, and he can attack the inside-outside shoulder, which is a great compliment to the fact that teams or offensive linemen are so afraid of his bull rush. But he's also a phenomenal run defender as well, just as Myles Garrett was. But he's a complete 4-down superstar edge, which is a great piece and to be the primary piece of that trade. So yes, the Browns were actually the number 2 defensive line in the league for me because Myles Garrett is that amazing. As, in my opinion, the best overall football player in the NFL today. Going from him to Jared Verse drops him down to the 10th overall D-line and a little tick below. They were the number 2 pass rush for me with Myles Garrett. Now they're 7th to 14th. So that's kind of the range of downgrade we're talking about here, but you can definitely, that's a really cool way to look at it. Be like, well, we're still pretty good at this. This is still a relative strength of our team, especially because it wasn't just Myles Garrett. There's other good pieces here. And you're really hoping this next guy, I'm actually going to kind of go through this group instead of starting with the edge and then going to the interior D-line, because I think Mason Graham, you're really hoping can take that next step next year. I would say Mason Graham was solid as a rookie and was everything from a floor standpoint that you would have projected him coming out of Michigan. Not the most physically dominant guy, but stronger than he probably should be, playing at around 300 pounds. Incredibly quick. Could move like a linebacker And running a lot of twists and stunts is absolutely in his bag in terms of being a weapon. But there's a lot of like undersized athletic stunt merchants in the NFL. Graham is so much more than that. He plays the run with strong arms, good technique. He has a good, workable foundation as a pass rusher, but you just want to see everything come together more consistently with him. He was just a very solid player as a top 10 pick. I think there is more in there with him. I do. I think especially the pass rushing, like start to stem stuff together a little bit more. The book is far from written on Mason Graham, and there's definitely a world where he can take that next step and you end up with Jared Verse is absolutely good enough to be a number one on a defensive line. That's probably the most important thing about that Myles Garrett trade is there's so many of these defensive lines we talk about where it's like, well, you got kind of a handful of guys we really like, but they don't have their Batman. They don't have the guy that D-lines are going to slide towards, that if you leave him one-on-one, he can really take over a game, that you want a guy that you are comfortable with as the best defensive lineman on your team. So many teams don't have that. You still have that in Jared Verse. It's just no longer Myles Garrett. And that keeps things reasonable for Mason Graham, whereas let's say they just got Byron Young back in that trade. Still a really good player, but the conversation would shift towards like, man, I really kind of am hoping Mason Graham can become, Quinnen Williams or Jeffrey Simmons, or be like, he's the guy you're kind of pointing to and be like, can you take that leap as a top 10 pick to be a dominator, to be a number one? He doesn't need to be that anymore. He can still be the number two that takes advantages of single teams and doesn't draw all the attention. That's great. Because I don't think Mason Graham showed enough in his rookie season to be like, yeah, he can definitely take that leap, But another nice thing is, as we continue to just work through this group, they do actually have another defensive tackle who, at least as a pass rusher, is actually currently better than Mason Graham. Malik Collins has always been a good player, and here in Cleveland last year, he really took another step, man. I mean, he was taking over games. He showed the whole package, power, rip move, a little bit of quickness. He's a really good athlete. He's just gotten better year in, year out. He's been around Dallas, Raiders, Texans, San Fran, and now at age 30 last year, he got off to the best start of his career, and then he did get hurt, unfortunately, around midseason. But it's not like he's been just plagued by injuries throughout his career. That was just classic bad Browns luck. You could even argue for the yellow arrow on Collins, where I actually think he played above the ranking I placed on him here as a 78, 77 overall. There is a reality check where it is 30, he is 31 years old. This will be his 11th season. There is 4 years of play before this last year in Cleveland that was more around this level where I have him ranked. He did get hurt last year. Like, there's some reality checks there that maybe you're not going to get exactly what he was last year, but even if he's 85, 90% of that, that's still a really nice interior piece that helps this whole thing out. But what's great is, even if Malik Collins is what he was the 4 years before last year in Cleveland, and Mason Graham does take a step up, well, versus your one, Graham's your two, and now Malik Collins, that level of play right there, what he's been the last 4 years, that's absolutely a really quality number three. So things can really, it doesn't take too much for things to line up into place. And then you end up with this kind of like thumping, physical, rotational group of very similar edge rushers that are very underrated players, both Alex Wright and Isaiah McGuire. In 2024, it looked like Isaiah McGuire was going to kind of render Alex Wright useless. And then in 2025, Alex Wright kind of punched back and took a big leap as he was a true traits-based developmental prospect. I want to say coming out of UAB, and things have been getting incrementally better for him, but things really clicked for him last year. He became more of a three-down impact and really became a good, heavy-handed tone setter on early downs that was really effective to help Myles Garrett I don't think it's an understatement to say that Alex Wright's emergence, plus what Isaiah McGuire does, these guys are very similar in terms of run defense-oriented edge rushers with a lot of play strength. I don't think it's an understatement to say that those guys really helped Myles Garrett win Defensive Player of the Year for the first time, because while the Browns weren't in a lot of game scripts that were advantageous for Myles Garrett, because you want the opponent to pass the ball so you can get sacks and pressures and win that award. Like the Browns were losing a lot of games and teams were running the ball a lot, but you still had Alex Wright, McGuire doing two things for Myles Garrett. Number one, helping stop the run so that teams, at least when games were competitive, did have to beat you through the air, and their drop back situations were more 3rd and 8 instead of 3rd and 4. Like Wright and McGuire played a huge part of that. And because these guys became such capable players, you maybe were able to buy Myles Garrett a rep here, a rep there. You didn't have to ask as much of him as a run defender, and he could be so fresh for those pass rush downs. And I still played a lot, but just in little moments here and there where you can lean on McGuire and Wright to do some of the dirty work a little bit more. And I think that will benefit Jared Verse as well. But yeah, they're both really good players, man. They paid Alex Wright because he was a year ahead of McGuire, and they wanted to keep both these guys, I think. And, it's like $11 million a year for what Wright did last year as, I would say, a top, 12 to 15 run defending edge rusher in the league, and a guy that has a little bit of get off and strength and a little bit of pass rushing chops. Not too much of someone you're worried about on pass rush downs, but he got in there, He's got NFL tools, just not like this dynamic pass rusher or anything like that. And I would say a lot of the same stuff about McGuire. McGuire's just maybe not quite as long, not quite as big, and was maybe a little bit better in 2024 than he was in 2025. But both guys are really nice 4th or 5th pieces to have, especially if Mason Graham can settle in as that number 2 spot. So that paints a pretty clear picture for how this is still a really nice defensive line. It obviously doesn't look as nice without Garrett there. But those are your core starters. But there's some other pieces to talk about here. So at edge, Julian Akwara is here. He's bounced around the league, never really reached his potential. But I would imagine makes this team. But we'll see, because I do like undrafted pickup Logan Fano. I thought he had one of the better first steps in this draft for edge rushers and had some impressive moments there at Utah. And he's on the team with his brother here, which is fun. So, I hope he makes the team. And honestly, man, he might have the best designated pass rusher potential. If you're talking about what, let's say, Agbanyo Okoronkwo has been for this team, where he really is just coming in as a flamethrower on 3rd downs. I mean, technically Julian Akwara could do that. Just hasn't been very efficient throughout his career. Logan Fano, man, if it's just 3rd and 10 and you just want him to scream up the edge, have an electric first step, make the quarterback kind of feel you breathing down his neck a little bit, even if he's not going to finish the play, just kind of create that unsettled pocket movement a little bit. And then you got all, versus disruption with the power. Graham and Collins are always looping and moving. There's a very real world where Logan Fano is a useful player here. So I'm definitely keeping an eye on him just to be a nice DPR. I thought that was a really nice pickup. I mean, I had him as an early day 3 type of prospect. I did. So to get him undrafted was really nice. I probably should have put him as an offseason addition, to be honest. Just sometimes the UDFAs slip my mind. Marquise Watts, athletic, started with the Bucks, I think. I'm not familiar with Sindor there. But then you go to the interior D-line, and big year for Mike Hall Jr. I missed on Mike Hall Jr. I really liked him coming out. He was a top 50 player for me, and for the Browns, I think they spent about a top 50 pick. I wasn't aware that he had these massive character off-field issues. And, another thing with off-field issues, we oftentimes our mind goes to oh no, he's going to get suspended and he's going to miss games. And that did happen with Mike Hall Jr. But the types of people with off-field concerns often also aren't the guys that have proper practice behavior and take the time to really understand how to get better. And that's also a concern. The kind of football character of someone like Mike Hall Jr., not just the off-field, like out in public behavior. And we have not seen development from Mike Hall, unfortunately, because he is a crazy athlete and his high-end plays at Ohio State were impressive, and he bulked up after his time at Ohio State. And, he's still been over a 10% pressure rate. His athleticism has given him a slight role when he's been available for the Browns, which just hasn't been too often. It's a big year for him to mature, and there's an opportunity to be this team's critical first guy off the bench, because Mason Graham and Malik Collins can't play 900 snaps. They can't. No D tackle can. I guess Zach Allen technically can for the Broncos. He's the only one that just doesn't come off the field. But someone else is going to have to play here. And to be honest, Mike Hall Jr. is the only one I'm really interested in. Kalia Davis was a disaster in San Francisco last year. He gets a contract probably off of his snaps played alone. I think most Niners fans are excited to watch a Niners team without a defensive tackle that gets obliterated against the run and was nothing as a pass rusher. He's played. That's the nicest thing you can say about Kalia Davis. And his contract was a 1 year, I think $1.8 million contract with incentives to get him up to $3 million. I wouldn't have many expectations there. And then you have all of these super undersized, athletes on the interior of the D line, Aiden Huntington, Sam Kamara, Elijah Chapman, and Tyreek Sapp, who actually played edge at Florida. Another interesting undrafted pickup here. All these guys play at 280 soaking wet. And Chapman actually had some flashes on the Giants. He comes in here. Sam Kamara and Huntington have been here. And then, Sapp's an undrafted rookie. But we talk about how this scheme moves these guys around. They lean into athleticism and stunting and that idea of running into a hurricane. That's why they have all these undersized interior D linemen. They all fit the system. So any number of these guys could make the team. It's probably not going to make a big difference who it necessarily is. I do think Chapman probably has shown the most as a pass rusher out of those guys. Tyreek Sapp is fascinating in the sense that he was an edge at Florida, and you could tell he couldn't be an edge. And he did bulk up in the pre-draft process. So if he's just better fit as an interior D lineman, maybe he surprises. So that's your D-line depth. There's worse D-line depth out there. There's better. But it's still a very good defensive line. And I would say a group that you can still be excited about for even this season, but beyond as well as a Browns fan, especially as we go through the rest of this defense. There's still a lot to work with here. And with a new defensive coordinator coming in as well, it's going to be really fun to see how this all comes together. But at linebacker, they did have a loss here. They lose Devin Bush in free agency, who broke out last year, top 10 draft pick by the Steelers, ended up in Seattle and then came here and ended up getting a big deal from Chicago in free agency. And he was really nice last year as a running mate to Defensive Rookie of the Year, Carson Schwessinger. They also lose some depth, Mohamed Diabate and Jerome Baker. And then they did add some athletes at linebacker, Quincy Williams, who is not dissimilar to how this team added Devin Bush as kind of a flyer on a once highly respected linebacker, and an undersized one at that. And then Justin Jefferson, not the Vikings wide receiver, but the Alabama linebacker. Very fast, very undersized. 5th round pick there. So let's break this linebacker room down. And this is another position group that gets that wild card because Schwessinger you have heading into year 2. And as we'll talk about with him, the sky is really the limit for him with what he showed in his rookie year. And then you have Quincy Williams, who's the ultimate wild card here, where he was an all-pro 2 years ago and just fell off. Just was nowhere near that the last 2 years. Just wild fall off for a guy that was flying around for the Jets. Kind of seemed to forget how to do it immediately. Crazy. But he is very much that classic swing it once was. And we don't know how good he's going to be here in Cleveland, hence why he's a wild card. But with that together, I've got the Browns with a B grade, ranking 10th to 13th for overall linebacker. For run defense, they rank 12th to 16th, actually with a B grade. And then for linebacker coverage, they rank 7th to 10th with a B minus grade, which is emblematic of the fact that there are a lot more linebackers in the NFL that can defend the run than guys that can cover. And these two guys are actually really athletic and not bad in coverage. So let's start with Carson Schlesinger, wins Defensive Rookie of the Year, incredible second-round pick in what's looking like an excellent draft class. And I loved Carson Schlesinger. I didn't think he was going to be this good this early. And I would say especially his ability to just come in and look like a pro-made, pro-ready run defender speaks volumes to his trajectory, because he was, I think, a walk-on at UCLA, certainly a one-year starter. And in that year at UCLA, where I loved what I saw, you did see a guy that kind of just flew after everything and sometimes took bad angles, sometimes overshot blocks, sometimes would dive in there and take himself out of the play. It was just kind of up and down as a run defender, more boom or bust, but also a guy that his coverage tape at UCLA was phenomenal. Clearly showed an understanding of zone IQ, how quarterbacks and modern offenses were trying to attack him. Never got over aggressive against play action. And he was really good as a coverage linebacker in his rookie season. Not perfect, but for rookie linebacker standards, I mean, he was still, I would say, one of the 15 best cover linebackers in the NFL, which is really freaking hard. This is one of, if not the hardest positions to play in the NFL. And, he still had some pass production, in particular, a nice pass breakup against Tennessee, week 14. Couple interceptions. One was this kind of a QB spy lurker, and one was a deflected ball that landed in his lap. But I would say, definitely has room to continue to get better in terms of locating the ball and being an impact coverage player. I would place his run defense ahead of his coverage, because he was a really steady tackler, and just the mind to see things, and his processing is really good, but his trigger and his reaction time is special. He clearly just is able to make decisions very quickly and has the instincts at this position. He's a pretty good blitzer too. So really good rookie season. Was a top 10 linebacker in his rookie year. It's how he ends up winning Defensive Rookie of the Year. And we're just getting started. How often do I talk about athletic linebackers needing until year 3 for it to click? The fact that he was as good as he was before all the development comes in, it's pretty crazy to think of. So really nice young player, one of the core building blocks of this team, and I'm excited to see what year 2 looks like for him. Quincy Williams, again, hop aboard the roller coaster. We'll see what he does, man. I mean, really, the last 2 years, he's been benched, he's missed a million tackles, he's lost that kind of nastiness against the run, he's not making the same number of plays. He's still an athlete and has continued to make the occasional splash play as a coverage player, and he can match up running backs. I'm less worried about the coverage as I have been about the run defense. But you got to call him a wild card, because we're not that far removed from him legitimately winning an All-Pro award and deserving it. He was insane on that 2023 Jets team, and the last 2 years, again, has not been that guy. So I would look at this and be if this team can get Devin Bush to go earn a 3-year, whatever it was, contract from the Bears, why can't they, get Quincy Williams to respond? Well, it's a new staff. You don't have Myles Garrett but in front of him anymore. We'll see what they can do with him. He's going to have a runway. I do believe that, because it's kind of a two-man crew here at linebacker. There's not a lot to get excited about. Justin Jefferson, I just think is a total project. I would be pretty surprised if, he ends up starting in his rookie season. He didn't even really play much real linebacker at Alabama. He was half the time a slot corner. He's undersized. He doesn't really understand how to get off blocks. There's just a lot to learn for him. You might have to play him out of necessity, but I don't know that it would look good necessarily. And then you have some other guys, kind of, I guess, probably career journeyman is how you would categorize these guys. Winston Reed has been around. He played in 2024, did not play last year, and it wasn't pretty when he played in 2024. You have Nathaniel Watson, who was a 6th round pick, either last year or the year before, but he hasn't really gotten on the field for them. Just 55 snaps in 2 years. Edifwan Ulofoshio, I wasn't a huge fan of him coming out. Thought he was another athletic guy that needed a long development trajectory ahead of him. And he was, I want to say he was older coming out. I could confirm that. I think he was already 24 and his tape was pretty raw. Got it right here. Yeah, he's already 26. And hasn't really played much, but he's athletic and showed some coverage stuff at Washington. So it's kind of Quincy Williams or bust right now for that LB2 spot. Like, unless you're a big Justin Jefferson fan, the linebacker, which I'm just maybe like eventually, but I would be pretty surprised. Like, he wasn't much of an impact player at Bama. He just ran fast. Very much a project for me, who you're thinking is going to develop first through special teams at a really hard position to play. But, tough group to rank. But it's still, I think, Carson Schwessinger alone gives you floor and ceiling. And then Williams is just kind of this magic grenade that you're throwing into the middle of this defense to say, let's see what happens. I wish you had somebody else that just like, whether it's a Jack Gibbons or like what, I don't know, Hicks was for this team, or even retaining like Jerome Baker or Mohamed Diabate, who played okay for this team. Just like someone that if Quincy Williams is like unplayable, which he's been at times for the Jets, someone else that you can turn to with like raise the floor a little bit more at that LB2 spot would be nice. Right now they don't really have that. So you're really counting on development for the depth for sure. But let's go to the secondary, where they made pretty minimal additions this offseason and very minimal losses on top of that. At cornerback especially, they lose nobody and did add Miles Bryant as some slot cornerback competition. And then at safety, they do lose Rayshawn Jenkins, but they make a great draft pick, in my opinion, of Emmanuel McNeil-Warren at the end of the second round. May or may not start right away, but a really good value where they got him. And then they also bring in Daniel Thomas for some added depth. But the reason I couldn't quite call the D-line the best part of this team is the secondary might steal the spotlight as that. There's still some question marks here. There's some holes, especially in the slot. But they actually come out with a B+ grade for DB coverage, which ranks 7th to 11th. Some more questions with the run defense side of things, which has been an issue over the years in Cleveland, is support from the third level. But it's better than it was a couple years ago. They still get a C grade there in that cluster that's 17th to 29th for DB run defense. But yeah, it gets them to top 12 for overall defensive back, 11th to 12th there. So not a super deep group, but your starters are pretty nice, and you have a pretty fascinating conversation in the nickel. You got Denzel Ward, who we actually have a good conversation coming up here pretty soon at this point in our conversation with Cory about where we should be at with Denzel Ward, but he's still kind of a borderline top 10 corner for me. And even if he has a couple games where he gets got, he's for the most part going to be in guys' hip pocket, excellent man corner. He is the number one reason the Browns ran as much cover one as they did last year, which, as we showed, was literally the most of any team in the league. And you don't run cover one if you don't trust your corners. And Denzel Ward is still to this day one of the best man-to-man corners in the league. I think his zone is probably where you might nitpick him a little bit, just like not always instinctive to navigate his way in front of throwing windows, maybe not the most opportunistic zone corner. And that's fine. But even the most man-heavy team in the league only runs man coverage 30. I mean, we showed it, right? factoring in zero coverage and cover 2 man, you're still running zone almost 60% of the time. So it does matter to be able to do both. And I would say, yeah, Denzel Ward's zone is just okay. And that's probably where he's struggled to like really ascend to that like all pro incredible level. But it's an excellent starting point in your secondary to have a legitimate number one guy like that. And then you have the addition last year, which happened early enough in the season, a week 5 trade where they get Tyson Campbell for Greg Newsome, which like Greg Newsome's been a perennial question mark for this team with a lot of upside. And Tyson Campbell just came in and was an awesome number 2 corner. And this might be the best that this secondary has been kind of in the, I guess, what do you want to call it? Postmodern Browns, the Denzel Ward era, maybe, because Greg Newsome's been so up and down. At this point, the other corner they had is a bleeping afterthought at this point. I can't even think of his name. Martin Emerson isn't even on this team anymore after a promising rookie season. He's on the Saints now. But yeah, they just haven't really had a bona fide number 2 corner until last year. And we didn't really get to appreciate it because at that point the Browns season was already falling off the rails. But that's pretty sweet, man. I mean, Tyson Campbell has always been right on that line of like not crazy athletic or dominant. You know, he might have a couple weeks where he gets beat. But for the most part, he's kind of been on that line of like amazing number 2 corner and just maybe not quite good enough to be a CB1. But Jacksonville kind of gave up on him too quick in a new system last year, and Cleveland was to benefit, man. I mean, he was really one of the best acquisitions that happened during the season. And it's funny, like the Jags were involved in both of those because they gave Tyson Campbell to the Browns, but they also got Jacoby Myers right around that time, which was the other on that list. But really a nice addition, man. So Ward, Campbell, that's the foundation of why this is such a highly ranking secondary. Now, the other cornerbacks here, like you need those 2 to stay healthy, certainly, which isn't a major concern. Campbell's had some stuff, but I'm not going to call him injury prone. But you certainly don't have anybody that you're prepared to have step in front of, if those 2 guys go down and they haven't really invested in too much else there. But it's not just the depth. You actually have a starting position that is unfortunately a major question mark in what is an otherwise really good-looking secondary, and that's in the nickel. Myles Harden started there last year. I'm not prepared to say he was good. I do think he was a weak link for this defense. He got picked on. Over a 70% reception percentage allowed, 74.2%. Yes, it tends to be higher from the slot. I would say about a 60 to 65% is pretty good from the slot. But you probably would expect a little bit lower in such a man-heavy defense. It's usually more of those like, space attacking zone from the slot, like that. You get a lot of these slot corners that get credited with those targets. But he also missed 24.5% of his tackle attempts. So he's not sticky in coverage, and he's not finishing as a tackler. He played fast. He earned this opportunity because of his go-getter mentality. If I'm a Browns fan, I'm not super optimistic about that. I mean, yes, he's young. Theoretically, he can develop, but he's a long ways to go there. For a guy that played in 16 games last year, was an active liability. And I'm actually pretty surprised they didn't do more to upgrade there. Other than Miles Bryant. At least you still have a couple Miles on this defense. But unfortunately, I don't think these guys are going to be doing the heavy lifting for this defense that the other guy was doing. But yeah, Miles Bryant is exactly what he is. He is a better player than Myles Harden right now, and he might win this job. He is a adequate zone slot corner. He's a smart player, and he's a much more reliable tackler. Right now, they're listing Myles Harden as the starter. We'll put him up there for now. I think it's probably Miles Bryant, to be honest, by week 5, unless Myles Harden really does develop. We'll see how that all plays out, obviously. But that's still not good. Like, he's been bounced around the league for a reason. There were times with Myles Bryant when he was starting in New England that we saw, like, the Bills, their whole game plan was find Myles Bryant and throw the ball at him, isolate him and go after him. He can make some plays from zone just with his head, but he's small and not very athletic. Like, he's got severe limitations. He's been one of the worst starting nickels in the league. He's ideally played a little bit of safety last year for the Texans. He's ideally a special teamer, slot corner depth, and maybe a dime back. And then really the only other thing you have from a cornerback perspective is D'Angelo Ross, who's been a journeyman backup, and nothing more, nothing less. Likewise, Trey Avery, he got some opportunities to play 2022, 2023 in Tennessee. It's been a while since then. Those were, that was 3 seasons ago at this point, and it's not like he was great. So he's a backup option, I suppose. You got Dom Jones and 3 other names that haven't really played in the league, undrafted types. So certainly a severe drop-off in cornerback talent after the top 2. You have one of the better 1-2 punches, maybe the worst depth and slot corner spot in the league if you pair those two together. Now, there is an option for the Browns that I actually think they might go with, that if they do go this path, would eliminate that as a severe weakness, and the potential for them to do this honestly keeps them with a B+ grade for their secondary as opposed to a B, because it can be a weak link position, and when Miles Harden and Myles Bryant are the projected slot, that is a weak link. I do look at the draft pick of Emmanuel McNeil-Warren in an already pretty good safety room and think, is this going to be the next team to go to the modern meta of a 3-safety nickel-based defense and use a safety as your nickel cornerback? I think that could very well be the case. Now, that would require foresight and creativity and an understanding of league trends for Mike Rutenberg to do that. But I'm cautiously optimistic that he'll be able to look at this team and be like, no, that's not just what's working around the league. That's what we need to do with where this team is at. Now, who would be the nickel out of these safeties? To me, Grant Delpit actually fits that archetype of the Nicky Manwari, the Derwin James, big safety, the Kyle Hamilton. He's not as good as those players, but he's got that same idea of the length. I think Grant Delpit's best plays are from the wing, in the alley, in the short to intermediate game, defending the curl flat, blitzing, filling the run, just being an athlete with some length and his instincts. And I think you could get the best out of Grant Delpit in a way that they haven't really consistently gotten from him, neutralize that nickel corner spot, and have the best possible version for this defense. And honestly, a defense that would be more modern, more fit to the modern game, and with a linebacker room that has some questions, depending on, obviously, what happens with Quincy Williams. But to have more size and run defense capabilities with someone like Grant Delpit in that spot would really help. So I'm kind of calling on the Browns, like, let's do that, but we'll see where they want to go with their scheme and their player usage here. And if that's the case, you're talking about Ronnie Hickman and Emmanuel McNeil-Warren, the rookie second-round pick, as your 2 starting safeties. That's what I would do. We'll see which route they go. Because, Grant Delpit as a, in a defense that especially is going to run a lot more quarters and split safety stuff, I'm not going to say Delpit's bad at it, but again, that's not really like where he's thrived. He's never really thrived anywhere. He's just been a pretty good player. That's probably been a little bit inconsistent, but I like Grant Delpit. He's a good player in a contract year. Ronnie Hickman on the back end, to me, is a what you see is what you get safety. Not a great athlete, not incredible playmaking range. Never going to be someone that opposing defenses are going to like game plan and be like, we got to know where Ronnie Hickman is at, because he's a turnover, he's a play waiting to happen, and we gotta stay away from him. But he is a great cleanup artist on the back end, consistent tackler, right place, like understands his assignment as the last line of defense. When they go single high, he is the free safety. And again, like adequate production on the back end. He can make plays, but he's not going to like blow you away with his range or being this enforcer on the back end. Very steady player that's probably going to get an extension here because he's just a very stable player. And I think he can handle split safety alignments as well. And then you got Emmanuel McNeil-Warren. Really good safety prospect. I think there's some little things that I nitpicked in his game, which he was more of a top 50 player for me. I was more comfortable with him inside the second round than the first round. But they get him at the end of the second round. And he's a playmaker, man. He's got really good coverage feel. I think his zone IQ is really workable. He's got great ball skills, a bunch of forced fumbles, good speed and range on the back end. Nothing crazy. Like he ran a 4.55, but I talk about this all the time. Like, yeah, speed is nice, but it's much better to know what you're doing, have anticipation, have ball skills. That shows up much more often than just that extra half a step you get from being, a little bit faster, like, yeah, it's good to have that margin for error be reduced if you have 4.3 something speed. But think of those like, those side-by-side 40-yard dash cams that they show. If you're a 4.55 compared to a 4.4, you're about maybe one step, a half a step ahead by the time that thing ends. Like at the end of the day, like, mentally being a full step ahead is much more important, if you get what I'm saying. And Emmanuel McNeil-Warren has that, especially as a split safety, two shell guy. I think he can go single high free safety. He's got size to exist down in the box. That's where I nitpicked him a little bit, where I didn't think he was as good at getting off blocks as you maybe expected. He is a little bit more slender. And I thought he did take some bad angles in the run game. You really saw that in the Kentucky game when he faced SEC competition, and he played at Toledo, so the level of comp is going to go up, but he's a really good safety prospect, and I do think he is he's one of their 5 best defensive backs on day one, in my opinion, and should only get better. You could play him in the nickel. Again, I think Grant Delpit would be best in the nickel just for him himself, and I think Emmanuel McNeil-Warren is more of a strong safety. Like, if you're saying this is let's say the Ravens defense with Kyle Hamilton being the nickel corner, typically you'll have someone who's more of the strong safety, who's going to be most of the time just in your split safety alignments where him and the free safety are doing the same thing, but you're still going to run cover 3. You're still going to want a guy that you prefer to rotate into single high, and then you still are going to have a guy that you prefer in kind of those either curl flat or hook zone areas, the intermediate zone defender, and more of a guy that's going to fill the run in those safety rotations. That's Emmanuel McNeil-Warren in that strong safety spot who can rotate deep. And then Ronnie Hickman is your true free safety. Like, that makes a ton of sense for me. Sometimes teams do what makes sense for me. Sometimes they go in a different direction. So that's the biggest thing I'm keeping an eye on with this secondary is if they're just a 3 safety base, and if Grant, like, I think that you could even argue for the up arrow on Grant Delpit in that role, in the Kyle Hamilton, Derwin James, Nicky Manwari role, I think would really fit him in a contract year. Very fascinating, in my opinion, as a football nerd. The safety depth, I mean, Daniel Thomas can hit and play special teams, not a coverage guy. But every team could use a Daniel Thomas for special teams and I guess emergency safety depth. And honestly, Miles Bryant can be safety depth for you as well if you want to get into that. Or you get back to more of a slot corner nickel type of starter if one of your safeties gets hurt and you just run 2 starting safeties. So I'm not concerned about this safety room. I think it's a really good group. And Emmanuel McNeil-Warren was a really fun pick. I'm just excited to see how they use this group schematically speaking. So it is a good secondary on the back end. Again, ranking 11th to 12th for overall secondary. But where does this Browns defense land overall now that Myles Garrett has been sent away? 17th for overall defense. Still a very solid unit there. They were, by the way, 11th with Myles Garrett. So you can, again, contextualize just how important a player like that is. But definitely on this side of the ball, there's still reason to believe that they can keep this team in games, maybe even scratch and claw their way to a few wins. And there, as we've talked about, there's some pretty solid youth and room to improve and for this to still be a top half defense in the league. And they're not too far off of it right now. They do come in better for pass defense than they do for run defense for me. They came in 13th for pass defense. And then I think this is the first time in the series we actually have a team that tied with another one for total team run defense. That's pretty rare because literally everything needs to line up the same way. So we'll find out who tied with the Browns for the 22nd run defense in the league. But yeah, I think this defense will keep games competitive as they've done in the past. It's just not going to be quite as much as it's been, I think, with Myles Garrett. But let's talk a little bit of special teams before we get into some final predictions here, and then, of course, bring in the interview with Cory Kinnan. But as far as offseason changes with the special teams go, they really didn't do much. Casey Concepcion may or may not play special teams. He's actually not currently listed with that unit, but who knows? He was a really good returner at Texas A&M. So we'll see if they want to use him or not. But those that have followed the series know I use a hard formula for special teams, just plugging in a bunch of variables to try and predict special teams, which is very unpredictable. But the variables didn't land in the Browns' favor necessarily for their special teams projection this year. They came in as the 29th ranked special teams in the league. But to go through those variables, so PFF loved the Browns' special teams last year. This could be a deep dive in its own right, in its own unique videos. Like, how do we get PFF has the Browns as the second ranked special teams last year, and DVOA has them 31st. The short answer there is probably they just value very different things at times, but that's why I averaged the two together. So kind of a middling average there, obviously, with those splits. But the kicker for them ranks 22nd with Andre Schmidt. I think I got that right. Yeah, I must have nailed that. They do have a great punter in Corey Bojorquez, ranked 7th. But yeah, the returner is going to be a question mark for them. If they lean into Casey Concepcion, it could be pretty damn good there, but there's not a whole lot of evidence currently that that's what they're going to do. We'll see, though, certainly, and it's not like that's going to change the Browns' team ranking or anything. But right now, they've got Gage Larvidane, who I think muffed 3 punts last year, so okay. That's an interesting choice if he even makes this team. And then Malachi Corley, who just wasn't really great as a kick returner there. So we'll see if they want to lean into Casey Concepcion more. Would certainly help. But yeah, not the best projection for the Browns special teams, but there's a reason I don't weigh it very heavily because it's extremely difficult to predict special teams on a year-to-year basis, if not damn near impossible. But let's take a look at our team summary page with the strengths, weaknesses, and pivotal factors. I do think for the Browns, you have a couple of decent strengths. D-line and secondary, I think, are still strengths of this team. They're not dominant strengths. They were both like borderline top 10, which is still pretty damn good. So those are still strengths for the Browns. The weaknesses, quarterback, obviously, and that's an area where I'm not personally projecting too much growth for them to really climb out of that. But at wide receiver and offensive line as the other true weaknesses on this team, I think that paints a very nice picture for what you can hope for this Browns team this year, is that you can come out of this year and say, our only weakness is quarterback. Obviously, anything could pop up or change where something else maybe drops into being a weakness there. But if you hit your green lights on the O-line, maybe it won't be a dominant O-line, but it could certainly be good enough that it's not a weakness this year. I feel pretty good about saying that. And then they definitely have upside at wide receiver with those big draft picks to feel good about those guys. And you say that's not a weakness. If you just come out of this and you're picking a quarterback next year and dropping it into a team without any other big weaknesses, that's kind of the dream. And as you turn your attention to the wild card pivotal factors for this team, you do see the O-line and the weapons show up in that group. I do think further linebacker upside is in there. Like, okay, if Schlesinger takes another step, which is very reasonable to say in year 2, and if Quincy Williams gets back to being an all-pro level player, not likely necessarily, but I wouldn't say it's impossible. Okay, you have the best linebacker room in the league. Linebacker can only go so far, but when you already have a good D-line and a good secondary, okay, how good of a defense are we talking about here? Especially with the final wild card there being the entire new coaching staff. So if Mike Runningback is really good at this, and the linebackers become a pair of all pros, you got a really good D-line, and maybe, Mason Graham is another wild card there. He takes another step. The secondary comes together. Okay. Is this a top 8 defense still? That's still probably a team that's going to win you 6 or 7 ball games, even if you have the worst offense in the league. So kind of a fun way to look at it there. Let's take a look at their schedule and ultimately what I'm predicting for this team. It's a moderate schedule. You've got a last place schedule, so you've got some games in there. Jets, Raiders, Titans, at the Giants. There's certainly winnable games on the schedule, no doubt. And by the math, it's an easy enough schedule that they did actually come out by the math projected with 5 wins. Their over-under is 4.5 wins, and that's post-Myles Garrett trade. But they are tied for the worst odds to win the Super Bowl, and definitely the worst odds in this division. As far as my actual prediction goes, I did lower the Browns by 2 wins without Myles Garrett. And maybe I'm a hater for doing that, but I think it just kind of changes the outlook for this team because I am lower on the offense. And the quarterback especially. Like, I just don't have optimism there that things look that much different than they did last year. Maybe they're a little bit better because the infrastructure is better. But the only reason this team was able to win games was because they were so dominant on defense. I still think this is a pretty good defense, but you saw that drop off. And in those games that they did win, how often was it Myles Garrett is dictating this game plan or taking over this game? They beat the Packers last year because they came in so scared of Myles Garrett that they were afraid to throw the ball all game. They beat the Raiders 24-10 because of an 11 pressure 3-sack game from Myles Garrett. They beat the Steelers 13-6. That was 3 out of their 5 wins last year. I don't think any of those happen. Maybe the Raiders one does, but 2 of those don't happen without Myles Garrett. And I'm taking 2 wins off of where I originally had him at 5 again this year, where I originally had him ranked and projected. I think he's that good of a player, man. I do. So my new prediction for the Browns is a 3-win season, which would be under for them on the year. And honestly, man, that might be the biggest, ultimately, maybe the biggest reason why this trade is a good thing for the Browns. If you're talking about the difference on your season is -2 wins, you get 3 wins, and you have a top 2 pick in this upcoming draft, that's a quarterback, which is ultimately all that matters. If you play this year and Myles Garrett tears it up and you win 5 games and you have the 6th pick in the draft again, and you miss out on a quarterback, and shit, now Myles Garrett's 31 years old and we still don't have a quarterback. What was the whole point? So not only did you get a younger Jared Verse, you got all these extra picks that maybe could be used to move up for a QB if the opportunity presents itself, but we know a lot of other teams are going to be making that, wanting those high picks. But if you've now got all that and you're positioning yourself to get the quarterback, it's another reason why the trade makes so much sense. So I don't think that's the worst thing. If the Browns win 3 games and some of these other things we've talked about, you're getting thumbs up, green lights on. So there's your win prediction for me on the Browns. As far as floor, if the quarterback room is a worst case outcome, and this is just by far the worst QB play in the league, and you aren't winning games on literally the heels of your defense alone, 2 wins, I think, is the worst case possible scenario. Again, maybe not actually the worst case, if that gets you the number 1 pick in a good QB class. If we hit some of these green lights, I said 6 wins for the ceiling. I do still think they're going to be pretty capped by their quarterback play by the end of the day. But yeah, the defense could end up being pretty damn good, and they have much more to work with offensively. I think 6 wins is where I'm comfortable with for their ceiling. And then what I'm going to do now, I am going to play the interview with Cory, who provided so much insight on the Browns. It's great because everything I asked him about wasn't really related to the results of the defense or Myles Garrett. We didn't really talk about Myles Garrett much at all. This was pre-Myles Garrett trade, but I don't think it changes anything about what we talked about here in this video, which is fantastic. So really enjoy this interview. And then when we come back, I will give you my team's Superlative award winners for the Cleveland Browns. And now I am super excited to welcome Cory Kinnan of the Daft of Draft podcast. You guys know his co-host as well. James Foster's been on to represent the Titans for this series, but now we get to welcome Cory in to talk about some Browns football here. Cory, how you doing, man? It's good to see you.
Yeah, it's great to see you. In the past couple of years, hanging out in Frisco and in Indianapolis, so it's good to be on that franchise guy. It's an honor. So thanks for having me.
Absolutely. The last time I saw you, we were watching the NFC Championship at what's that bar down at
Sidecar Social? Yeah,
the Sidecar Social. I saw the look in your eyes watching two teams in a conference championship game. You're like, man, if my Browns could be there one year, that would be really nice.
Mm-hmm. They were in 2020 a Daniel Sorensen uncalled helmet to helmet away from being there, but it is what it is.
You're not salty. So my first question for you is, I want what was your initial reaction with the Todd Monken hire? Was it feel good vibes, or do you want more? How are you feeling there?
Yeah, it was definitely an interesting vibe. With the direction of the team, where clearly a really young roster. If you look at the amount of snaps taken by rookies last year, the amount of draft picks selected this year, I thought they would have gone for a more younger, up-and-coming coach, giving them a longer runway to grow with the roster, the age of the roster. Mm-hmm. That's why I thought Grant Udinsky or Nate Schillhouse would have been like the hires. The other two guys that were very heavily included in that coaching search, I thought they were going to be one of those two guys was going to be the head coach. The Monken thing is a little surprising, given his age, never had a head coaching job before. And just the way that the front office and head and coaching staff has communicated since 2020, when Andrew Berry took over, it's been very tight-lipped, been very even-keeled mannerisms. Like, they don't say anything in press conferences. You'll never catch them upset. You'll never catch them excited. Even it's just very baseline. It's hard to catch any sort of emotion. Since Todd Monken's been hired, it's been he's cursing and press conferences and being like, yeah, these guys are throwing interceptions in 7-on-7. It's unacceptable. And he's just completely the exact opposite. Maybe that's what they were going for in this new coaching search. I'm more optimistic than I was at the hiring point. He is a coach that has operated some very successful offenses at both the NFL and the college level in his time. Now, he's never sat in the CEO chair before, so that is a different experience. And how is that going to handle in terms of building his staff and whatnot?
Let's talk about this quarterback room. We had to get into it. It's the big talking point in Cleveland. You do a lot of good scouting work over at Daft of Draft and all the other work. I wanted your just kind of Shedeur breakdown. What did you see in his rookie season? What surprised you? What didn't surprise you? And what are your expectations for him heading into this year?
My expectations are low. That quarterback room in general. From him, what I saw was oh boy, I'm trying to think of an honest way to say this. A lot of times the numbers looked better than the tape, especially the Titans game where he put up some pretty gaudy numbers. The Steelers game where they won, he didn't really even put up good numbers, but that touchdown he threw to Harold Fannin in any other safety back there besides Kyle Duggar is an interception going the other way. I struggle to have optimism about a Shedeur Sanders operated offense. Just the arm talent isn't there to compensate. He's pretty antsy in terms of what he does when he's put in a microwave and pressured. He starts to run around back there, and then his lower body tools aren't even good enough to really extend or run around back there and create. So, his pressure rate and his scramble rate were among the highest of any NFL quarterback last year, up there with like Caleb Williams and Lamar Jackson. But the guys that he's up there with have requisite tools to compensate. It's like the meme of you don't have the facilities for that, big man. It's like that. That's pretty much the Shedeur Sanders experience last year. They're saying it's a quarterback competition. We'll see if it actually is. My expectations are not high, and my honest assessment is like you can't start 6 games and have as many turnovers and as many close calls and as many sacks taken and as many the list goes on and on about what happened in his starting experience.
Yeah,
that I'm not optimistic.
Yeah, was there, and I told you in the list I sent you coming on, like it's a safe space. You can say whatever you want about Shedeur. My fans are well educated. They're not going to come at you for hating on Shedeur. But was there any one thing that you felt he did well, or was it really just like absolutely not?
I mean, they respect the dude. Everybody respects the dude. So there is that going for him. Like the magnet effect is real. Like people flock to the guy.
Okay.
So, and that includes his teammates. So maybe there is some opportunity to build some rapport in that building and come back strong. I don't believe that he was a 5th round prospect.
Yeah.
But there's a lot there. There's a lot there. And I understand maybe why some teams decided not to bring everything into the building.
It's kind of funny. Like it kind of feels like to some degree the same thing kind of happened to Garrett Nussmeier a little bit this year, but nobody talked about it. Where like there was a report that like he kind of rubbed people the wrong way with interviews, and it's like he's kind of a bigger name because of his dad, and like there was kind of a similar thing going on there, but no one talked about it because it was Garrett Nussmeier. Nobody cared. But that takes me to Deshaun Watson. So should we be taking this idea seriously that Watson is going to start this year? And I guess you've kind of already said like your expectations are low there, but what are your expectations there with him?
Yeah. So in OTA so far, they're 2 spotting. So like they're running teams on both sides of the field. So they're both getting first team reps, quote unquote. I would be shocked if Deshaun Watson's not starting week 1. Like I think it's legitimate. I think it's 100% serious. He returned to practice at the end of last year. Never came off of physically unable to perform list or anything like that, but did practice at the end of last year. And I know a lot of people up there, and a lot of people are saying like he was easily the best quarterback on the field. This summer it's kind of the same thing, which is again a very low bar. So like that's not an assessment that I feel really good about. But that is kind of the assessment that like no, he's in a bad quarterback room. He's the guy still. So yeah, you should take it pretty seriously. I like the quarterback competition thing. I don't know is truly going to happen, because even Monken has said in press conferences like mandatory minicamp is coming up in like next week, in the next week or so. He wants to have the quarterback that he wants to give the majority of training camp reps to named by the end of mandatory minicamp.
Sure.
I have a hard time seeing that not being Watson.
Sure. Has there been any messaging about like, he's learned from his history and he's more focused or anything? Or is it literally just like, yep, he's the same Deshaun, but it just happens to be the best quarterback in the room?
I don't know how you can message around that guy anymore. Like there is no like he is this. I mean, he does his own kind of stuff about like he tweets out like the praise God stuff and all of like the religious stuff, and his Instagram is kind of filled with the two. But like I think the most part, like the team just like tries to focus on the quarterback, and they don't even talk. They don't even act like there's anything there off field. So like, what is he bringing to the field? What is he bringing to the team?
Sure.
Is he focused? How's his recovery? I think the messaging is 100% football focused with Deshaun Watson from here on out. And being, we're in year 4 now, so it's like everybody knows they're not hiding anything. So the messaging is pretty football focused at this point.
Yeah, the team's already kind of paid for their sins on that one. It's just like let's just get through this. Okay. All right, let's shift to some draft talk. So they trade down a couple spots, end up with Spencer Fano there with the 9th pick. What was your thoughts on that? Would he have been your choice among these top tackles?
Yeah, Spencer Fano was my offensive tackle 1, doing a bunch of scouting work and draft work this past year as well. They would have taken him at 6 if they didn't. Well, they might have taken Jordan Tyson at 6 if they didn't get a trade offer. It was between
Okay.
Tyson, Fano, and Moe Noah were the three guys they were discussing between.
Yeah.
But they get the trade offer, pick up a couple third round picks, move down. Yeah, I think that's like a great pick. Left tackle was kind of telegraphed, even though Fano was a right tackle at Utah. He did start at left tackle his freshman year, but
Hmm.
he is the Browns' starting left tackle. Yeah, I thought it was a great pick. Young guy, high end athletic traits, maybe a little bit undersized. But again, a guy that I feel good about, even if it doesn't hang at tackle, you can fail inside to guard or even center. Um,
Yeah.
and so at the end of the day, if you can find an NFL starter in the first round of the NFL draft, that's your ultimate goal. I think the upside's there. Especially a team like the Browns, who have a history of bringing people into their building with not so high character, and that's not even just the quarterback position. We're talking like they took
Yeah.
every day. There's at least one day 3 pick a year. They're like, yeah, we know the guy's questionable, but if we have to cut him, it's like no dead money. And then they
Yeah.
end up having to cut him because they're a pain, like Perion Winfrey. They brought in Isaiah Bond last year. Mike Hall Jr. had some character concerns. They
Right.
drafted him in the second round. So like we've really seen a shift in the kind of people they're bringing into the building over the past 2 years. Yes, Quinshon Judkins had the
Yeah.
thing, but like he had nothing in his character background
Right.
prior
That was a
to
total
that.
shock.
Um,
Yeah.
and then you had like guys like Carson Swessinger and like all of these other players. They've kind of made this shift, and they tagged Fano as their orange dot player, which is like each scout gets like these guys that they're allowed to like pound the table for. They're their orange dots, and Fano is one of those guys. So I feel good about the player. I feel good about the person. I feel good about the long-term outlook there.
Yeah. Absolutely. I'm excited to watch his run blocking in more of a real system, because that
Yeah,
was a frustrating
yeah.
point for me at Utah.
It's
Is
all
like,
hinging.
and
Yeah.
I didn't go back to, and this is what's so great about what like you and James are doing. Like you're getting into it so early. Like you probably saw a little bit more of Fano's like sophomore year, I would imagine.
Mhm.
Maybe not, but I know I certainly like I don't always have time to go back to like the year before. And like I know his like if you just look at like the grading profile, he was in like the 90s for his PFF
Mhm.
run blocking grade the year before. This year, I did have some concerns, just like the offense never asked him 2 point
Mhm.
stance, a lot of RPOs, like never really let him get truly into it as a run blocker. So that was one thing I was like, I wish I would have gotten to go back to see why he got some of those higher graded games. But yeah, I'm excited to see him put his hand in the dirt and get after it a little bit more, because you get to see the athleticism a lot more there. So I'm excited for that.
Yeah, so they were
Um,
they were a pure wide zone team in 2023, and then they transferred
there
to
you go.
Dampier, and they evolved the entire offense around Dampier running tons of QB RPOs, QB power, so they
Yeah.
they completely evolved their blocking scheme last year around their quarterback.
Yeah.
So
There you go. Um, All right, the two wide receivers. I'm curious how you stacked those two guys,
yeah.
because I actually had Boston over KC Concepcion. I had them very tightly knit, and then when they took KC, I was like, man, don't they already have a bunch of small speed guys? Like I would have rather had Denzel Boston where they took him, and then they end up with both, and it's like, oh, great, this is perfect. How'd you stack those two coming out?
Yeah, so I was higher than consensus on KC. KC was my wide receiver 3 actually, and that's because I
Okay.
saw real X and Z potential from Z or from Casey at Texas A&M, where he is like legitimately beating press, legitimately separating on the
Hmm.
vertical plane, and like legitimately using his hands um, to create pockets of separation at the top of his routes and stemming. Like all of these things he's doing, and he's playing X at Texas A&M, and he's playing Z at Texas
Yeah.
A&M, and he's not this slot only guy that like Makai Lemon and Omar Cooper Jr. were for their teams. And so I was a bit higher on Casey Concepcion than consensus. So getting him as I think he was like the 5th wide receiver off the board, my wide receiver 3. I was thrilled with that.
Were you drafting
Yes,
for the Browns?
no, I wish. But yeah, so like he has maybe a similar like play style with some of those other guys, but I think he plays through contact a lot better than especially a guy like Jerry Judy, better than
Hmm.
Isaiah Bond, stuff like that. So I think the nuance there, and they don't really have a guy that like can create the way that he can with the football in his hands. Like
Hmm.
Judy a little bit has some of that sudden movement, but you can tell the ankles are starting to
Yeah.
stiffen up in his older age and stuff like that. Um, so yeah, I thought that was a stellar pick. And then Boston, I was a little bit lower. I think I had him like wide receiver 7 or 8. I have my draft guide behind
Hmm.
me. I could pull it down if I really wanted to, um, but I was still a decent fan of Boston. I had a second round grade on him. I think where he was drafted was probably more appropriate. I also am willing to recognize that I kind of have a bias against bigger body wide receivers.
Sure.
Like they get tagged as like, well, they can't separate vertically, they can't get open, everything's contested catch, blah 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 blah. I
Yeah.
do think Boston moves better than a guy like Keon Coleman, better than a guy like N'Keal Harry, better than a guy like some of those other guys that
Yeah.
fit that bias pretty well.
It's
Um,
yeah.
yeah, but I do still have some concerns about like the top end speed, vertical speed, but I think he's way more agile than a guy 6'4", 217, like than you typically see from a guy 6'4", 217. The way he gets out of breaks, he returned a punt for a touchdown this past year, so like
Wow. I didn't
ability
know
to make
that.
guys miss with the football in his hands and stuff like
Yeah.
that too. So and they need that true dominant ball winning X. I mean, Cedric Tillman's on the roster for one more year, I guess, but Cedric Tillman hasn't really done the stuff they drafted him to do as a dominant ball
Right.
X. So, yeah, to stack those both back to back in the top 40, I think was stellar drafting.
Yeah, absolutely. Who was your favorite pick after the second round, which is kind of a tough
Ooh,
question, but
yeah.
did anybody stand out from this class? It was like, oh, nice, we got that guy. Because did they have a third round pick? Yeah, they did. They took
Yeah, Austin Barber.
the Barber. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Which you could be
Yeah.
your answer if you want.
I'm going to go Parker Brailsford. It's
Sure.
not often I'll pound the table for a 290-pound center, and I'm not pounding the table for like Parker Brailsford. But if you look at like the Browns have typically run outside zone, and when they've done it well, the size of their center hasn't traditionally mattered. And then you look at the Ravens offense, and of course I'm not comparing Parker Brailsford to Tyler Linderbaum, but Tyler Linderbaum, an undersized center. So it is from a scheme fit perspective, a center who can do all of the positive things in an outside zone run scheme. And as long as the guards can do their job, Zion Johnson, former first round pick, kind of started to come along in year 4, finally a little bit. Elston Jenkins, a former Pro Bowler. We could maybe work some magic here. I think there's a legitimate chance that Parker Brailsford could start as a rookie, as a 5th round pick in a room with Luke Whippler, and then kind of like the Elston Jenkins things too. Is he going to play center? Is he going to play guard?
Yeah.
So kind of that conversation.
Let's talk a little bit about Harold Fannin, and this is kind of an uncomfortable conversation for me because I loved Fannin last year. He's a top 50 player, banging the drum for him. Loved taking victory laps on what he did last year. However, I have some concerns with the way they've kind of stacked this thing.
Mm-hmm.
I want you to talk me off the ledge here and tell me I got nothing to worry about. But last year, he played only 270 out of 786 snaps off the tackle as a true inline Y tight end. Now David Njoku's gone. They've brought in some projects on day 3. I'm curious if you think they have plans to make him the full-time, true tight end role, or if you think they will continue to use him that way in the kind of Isaiah Likely role. But with the way the roster is constructed, I have some concerns about that. So how do you envision his second season going? How do they use him? And then if he does get used as that true Y, do you think he can hold up there better than I'm a little maybe worried about?
Yeah, God, I hope they don't. I don't think that's the plan. I think more of the Isaiah Likely role is the plan. Again, they signed Jack Stoll, who's a journeyman blocking tight end. He's been all over the place.
I've always loved Jack Stoll.
Yeah, so they signed him. They drafted Joe Royer. They drafted Carson Ryan, who I think Ryan can play a little bit, and same with Royer, who had a down year this past year. But and they have a guy like Blake Whiteheart on the roster but this also comes with the caveat that they whiffed on some blockers they were going after in free agency with Monk and connections. They wanted Charlie Kolar, who signed with the Chargers. They wanted Patrick Ricard as kind of that utility move, 6th blocker kind of guy. He follows Harbaugh to the Giants instead. So they had plans to get that inline mask for Harold Fannin, and then they whiffed on both guys there. So, but I think then Jack Stoll is kind of that guy. Personnels with 11 or 12, 13 personnel are so nuanced now, where it's just because there's 2 tight ends on the field doesn't mean they both have to be good receivers. So I think there is a way to still shadow Fannin's inability to block by putting Stoll in line and Fannin at H or in the slot. I think that they could even have some roles carved out for these 2 rookies. You don't want to go into a season banking on day 3 rookies to be contributors day 1 , but looking at the tight end room, they don't have a whole lot of other option here. So I wanted Oscar Delp. If you look at the draft, the Browns were picking 74th, and Oscar Delp went 73rd overall, and then the Browns traded out of 74. So it feels like every every opportunity for an inline tight end that the Browns have actually looked at and pursued, they get sniped on this
Uh,
season so far.
okay.
So, yeah, so they've just kind of struck out on the inline thing, but I think they have a contingency plan to kind of like the Moneyball quote, right? Like, how are we going to replace Giambi? Well, we're going to replace him in the aggregate. We're going to throw 3 different
Absolutely.
dudes in here can kind of mix
Yeah.
the role and still keep Harold where Harold is best, and Harold is not best in line in blocking. So keep
Yeah.
him away from there, and then replace Njoku in the aggregate, I guess.
I love it. Yeah, that's good. That's reassuring that they were at least trying. Also, like, not to keep referencing my Packers, but when Kraft went down, we had some guys that like couldn't really block. Just go with the 6th offensive lineman
Yeah.
approach as that extra tight end. You got all these linemen in here now, so let's kick Fano out to tight end and throw him some footballs maybe. But that's another option maybe for them. All right, let's flip over to the defensive side of things. I just want to hear your kind of impression on. Obviously, Carson Schwessinger had such an incredible rookie season. Where did he impress you the most? And then what if anything, do you want to see him improve upon here in year 2?
Yeah, probably his trigger. He's unbelievably athletic and a super soldier body and a super soldier body type. So there's not a lot like if Carson Schwessinger plays like his rookie year for his entire NFL career, we're talking about an extremely good, like borderline fringe Hall of Fame linebacker. So that's how good he was as a rookie. I don't think he'll ever be like a Fred Warner Defensive Player of the Year candidate, but like no mental mistakes. He's always where he needs to be. He's a hard hitter, a firm tackler, high-end athlete. He'll rotate out in coverage. He can match tight ends. Like he checks so many boxes. So like, can you just run it back? And he even worked through an ankle injury at the end of the year last year too that he was playing through. I think what impresses me the most is they didn't plan on him being their day one Mike. Jordan Hicks was on the roster. Jordan Hicks arrives at training camp, goes to one practice and says, "You know what, guys, I think I'm gassed," and he retires. So then they're like, "All right, Carson, here you go," and he immediately took the green dot. He immediately became the leader of the defense. Well, Myles Garrett, but like the leader, the main communicator of the defense, and he handled everything well. I mean, and like coaching staff is heaping praise on him, like comparing him to Luke Kuechly, like day one. So like he has gotten high praise from day one, and like then week 1 came around and he didn't shy away from it. He didn't he wasn't shaking in his boots. So I think he's like a really mentally sound player. Like a fortitude for a mind where he can digest and process information and communicate it and know exactly where he needs to be at all times. Where he could get better, man. I don't have a great answer for that because there's not necessarily a big hole in his game. He doesn't miss tackles. He's not slow or unathletic. He has eyes in the back of his head in terms of being able to rotate out and match up the scene. Like, so I think just like, can you do it again? Just run it back year after year after year. And you're talking about a really, really strong career.
Awesome. All right. The last position group I want to ask some questions about is the secondary. And this next one doesn't need to be a super long answer, but I just kind of want your kind of stock check and how Browns fans are feeling about the Tyson Campbell trade last year. It kind of looks like a heist right now. Greg Newsome is no longer on the Jags. He's competing for a spot with the Giants. Did you love what you saw from Tyson Campbell, who seemed to play really well, or is there more to it than that?
No, I think that's exactly right. I think they got a strong deal with Tyson Campbell, and again, the amount of money they're responsible for on his contract versus what the Jaguars ate as well is minimal. Like his cap number in 2026 is $5 million.
Right.
And then he has no guaranteed money. Yeah, so they could even get out of it. But if he plays well again this year, what they're going to do is they're going to restructure that 18 and lower that cap number to the vet minimum and give him a bonus and probably give him an extension.
Yeah.
So to get that financial flexibility out of a player who was on an expiring contract, out of a player with extremely volatile tape, and out of a player whose personality tends to rub people in the building and opposing teams the wrong way. Like Greg Newsome is not a quiet individual. And then for Greg, obviously, best of luck to him in the future, obviously, but like for him then not to get that change of scenery and take advantage of it. And now he's on a prove-it deal with the Giants, while the Browns have a quality starter corner that they're paying $4.9 million this year.
Yeah, crazy.
Is, I think, a tremendous bargain. And again, it would be different if like this is a player that got paid and then he just completely flatlined and didn't perform up to the contract, like J.C. Jackson in Los Angeles. But this was due to a regime change and a scheme change and then the Jaguars just wanting to shed the cap of a contract of a previous
Yeah.
regime. The Browns are like, okay, that works for me. This is stellar. Even if you have to
Yeah.
replace him after this year, like this is a cheap starting caliber NFL corner. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Just total overreaction on the Jags end. Like a couple bad games from Tyson Campbell, a couple great games from Greg Newsome, and they're like, "Yep, we'll do that." And it's just like, "Whoa, okay." Yep. And then I wanted to ask you about Denzel Ward. Where are you at with him? Because he's actually a guy I kind of struggle with. Like I always enjoy watching him, crazy athlete. Like,
Mhm.
but sometimes the yards allowed, the coverage metrics on him can go up and down a little bit. Like where are you kind of looking at Ward heading into this year?
Mhm.
Top 10 corner, top 20 corner, not even that. How much do you kind of trust him at this stage?
Oh, I trust him. I would trust him with my life. I
Cool.
love Denzel Ward.
Cool.
And I don't want to come off like a homer, and I feel like I've been pretty honest
No, I
with
don't
that
think you
stuff
are.
and stuff like
Yeah.
that. But like, for one, the coverage, I always struggle with like the coverage metrics, like PFF yards allowed, stuff like that, because what they
Yeah.
do is they tag the defender closest to the receiver with the yards allowed. So like a lot of times he's
Mhm.
in cover 3 bail and they're throwing a slant in front of his face. Well, like Denzel's the closest man in coverage there. Like
Yeah.
if you watch his pure cover 0, cover 1 reps, he is one of the more prolific press corners in the NFL, man coverage corners in the NFL. Still a high end athlete. Didn't get a concussion last year for the first time in his NFL career. So we're throwing that out there as well. I think Ward is, especially at a position like corner, that is year to year the most volatile position. Since
Mhm.
2020, man, his play has been stable year in and year out. One of the more consistent corners over the past half decade in the NFL. So,
Yeah.
yeah, I'm over the moon about what Ward has been to the Browns and that he is still on the roster despite
Great.
some older players getting out
Cool.
there.
That's what I wanted to hear because that's what my gut has always told me on him.
Uh-huh.
And then sometimes it's like you put him like number 8 in the league, and they're like, "Ward, really?" Like I'm like, "Yeah, dude,
He's
tape's
good.
amazing." Yeah. Yep. Um, okay, the last question I have here is for the Emmanuel McNeil Warren. Great draft pick,
Mhm.
and unless you don't think it was a great draft pick, but I would imagine you loved it. Like there was
Yeah.
really no reason not to. But I'm curious how you envision him kind of getting on the field because I see two routes. Number one is they could go with more of a 3 safety defense. You have um, Harden in the nickel right now. So you could go with kind of a 3 safety defense there. Or is it more of a long play where he kind of has to take the job of Grant Delpit or Ronnie Hickman? And which of those safeties do you think he would take that job from, I guess would be the question.
Yeah, I would say a bit of both. He's definitely going to play early in the year. Like if you look at the way the Falcons were head over heels about Xavier Watts and what Xavier Watts did for the Falcons last year, and kind of that like rotational drop robber role, I think there's
Mhm.
a huge chance that day one, Emmanuel McNeil Warren is coming through with that. I do know that they like Ronnie Hickman quite a bit. He's on a restricted tender. I would be shocked if they didn't work out some sort of like 3-year deal for him, 2-year deal for him
Yeah.
as well. So they like him quite a bit. And then Grant Delpit has been. It's hard to put a number on Delpit, like top what, because Delpit has those waves up and down. When Delpit's at his best,
Yeah.
he's fantastic. Baseline, probably top 13 safety in the NFL. But he is in a contract year, and this is his second contract and his 7th NFL season. And so, like, that's what's hard to tell is like, will Grant play in under Mike Rutenberg, who runs a pretty similar scheme? And the Browns did a lot of 3 safety stuff, have done a lot of 3 safety stuff under Jim Schwartz as well. With Rodney McLeod was in the building
Right.
too. The old sturdy vet Rodney McLeod. So they got them all 3 on the
Yeah.
field pretty frequently. I would imagine a pretty similar scheme situation here. Now, how that happens, that's maybe the interesting question because like with the Falcons, like, yeah, Billy Bowman could play in the nickel for you and you could get away with it. I don't necessarily feel good about any of the 3 Brown safeties that we're talking about. Like, yeah, you can go out in the nickel and hang. Maybe McNeil Warren a little bit. Delpit in his younger years, probably, because he did it at
Sure.
LSU a bit. But that becomes the interesting piece is how do these pieces fit together? The
Yeah.
Browns have consistently been a team that, like, they don't want their rookies to have a heavy workload early, at least when they were competitive. From like 2022 to expected to be competitive through 2020 to 2023. That changed last year, obviously, because your starting quarterback popped his Achilles, and you're starting Joe
Yeah,
Flacco, and it's like, yeah, get the young guys out there, whatever, what matters this year.
but
It's kind of what makes me think they're going
awesome.
to be the Sorsby team, to be honest. If he's in the
Mm,
supplemental, like if they're going to play
that would
themselves out
make
of Arch,
sense.
then they might try to just take a shot this year, but who knows?
That would make a ton of sense, actually. Yeah. Good call. Good call. All right, Cory, this was a ton of fun. Just remind the people where they can find you and what all you got going on this summer.
Yeah, so my main project is always Daft on Draft. It's my Substack, daftofdraft.football. I try to aim for 4 heavy analysis pieces a week, whether that's a film room, a live charting of my quarterback breakdowns, scouting report, positional rankings, scouting notebook if I have enough intel from around the league to put together a piece on that, stuff like that. Daft on Draft podcast, recording 4 episodes a week with James Foster. So that's really my focus right now is I'm building that up. It's daftofdraft.football is that website.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Cory. This was a ton of fun, and thank you guys for watching. So big thanks again to Cory, but let's give you my Team Superlative award winners to wrap up the video here. So Team MVP, this is a fun one. And honestly, I thought about going with Deshaun Watson and Shedeur Sanders just for the irony of like, if they're so bad that the Browns get the number 1 pick, that's the most valuable player on the team this year. But I'm going to stick to my rules and do non-quarterback for Team MVP, even if that would have been for the wrong reasons. But a fun one here, I'm going with Jared Verse as the team MVP. I think Jared Verse is freaking awesome. And we still come out of this year and it's like, we love Myles Garrett, but we still got a hell of a player here. He still clearly allowed this defense to be competitive. And now maybe we do have that top pick. And he's younger and we have a much better future outlook for the long-term vision of this defense than they even did with Myles Garrett, who's on the other side of 30 at that point. So I went with Jared Verse in what I do think is going to be a win-win trade for these two teams. But the biggest wild card for me is Quincy Williams, for everything we talked about just a couple years ago as an all-pro linebacker. And if you do really have him and Carson Schwessinger playing at an elite level, playing off each other, even if it's the linebacker position, that can still change games. My breakout offensive player, and I don't do rookies for these, by the way, so that made this harder. You guys are going to hate me because this is the lamest thing ever. I said Jack Stoll. I think this is the year he becomes kind of that designated blocking Y tight end, a Josh Oliver, John Bates guy that gets a, either 2 years, 16, 3-year, $20 million extension after this year. And he himself isn't going to get a whole lot of headlines. He's not. You're going to have to be really paying attention to the Browns to recognize what he's doing. But he is going to allow Harold Fannin to continue doing what he does well. And he's going to help out this run game as well. So I went with Jack Stoll for breakout offensive player. Not an easy choice. And then breakout defense, this one was easy. Mason Graham, take that next step, young man. Super talented top 10 pick in year 2. Best rookie, this was hard. I think it's extremely close. Like literally a coin toss between their top 3 picks, between Fano, Concepcion, and Boston. I am going to go with Denzel Boston, though, because I do think for now, Judy and Concepcion will eat into each other a little bit because those guys are probably a little bit more redundant. Whereas I think Boston's role, especially like they're going to want him out there because he run blocks too. Like that matters early in your career, getting out there. He's an awesome run blocker. I think he's going to catch some touchdowns. I think he's going to move the chains. I really like Denzel Boston. Again, really tough choice. Honestly, I had Fano up and then I was like, do I want Boston? Am I going to get hate if I go with him over Concepcion? I like all these guys, and I think I don't think any of them are going to have like monster rookie seasons. I think there's going to be ups and downs for all of them, but I think you're going to probably feel good about those 3 guys coming out of this draft. They all make a ton of sense here. Fantasy MVP, which is baking in like ADP, finding value in the draft. I didn't really know who to go with, and then I looked, and Quinshon Judkins is like RB 25 right now in average draft position. I like that. I think they're going to lean into him. I think Judkins is really good. I think he's at least a top 20 fantasy running back this year with the improvements on the O-line. Absolutely. So Quinshon Judkins as like what is that? Probably like a 5th round pick, 6th round pick in your fantasy leagues as your starting RB2. I'll greenlight that. Absolutely. Might even be a 7th round pick, honestly. So love that as a choice. But there you have it. There is your Browns deep dive. Thank you to the Cleveland Browns for getting that Myles Garrett trade out before their deep dive so I didn't have to retcon this whole thing, because my God, was that a blockbuster. And a huge thank you to you guys for watching. Let me know in your comments down below what you think of the Browns analysis here today, and who do you think comes with our next deep dive, which is fast forwarding in the power rankings theoretically, because we're now going from our 31 ranked team to what will next be our 28th ranked team. So who do you think comes next? Let me know in the comments down below. I will see you guys for the next one. Thank you so much for watching. Please do hit that like button on the way out. It really does help me out. Subscribe if you like the deep dives. And that's all I got. Cheers.